These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. X-Chair, changing the world one seat at a time. More information at xchairtom.com. Bloomsy Box, simply better blooms. More info available at bloomsybox.com, code TOM. And Boll & Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bollandbranch.com, code TOM.
Fight back!
Our book today is The Poisoned City, Flint's Water and the American Urban Tragedy by Anna Clark. This is from the prologue. On a hot day in the summer of 2014 in the Civic Park neighborhood where Pastor R. Sherman McCathern preached in Flint, Michigan, water rushed out of a couple of fire hydrants. Puddles formed on the dry grass and splashed the skin of the delighted kids who ran through it. But the spray looked strange. The water was coming out dark as coffee for hours, McCathern remembered. The shock of it caught in his throat. Something is wrong here. Something had been wrong for months. That spring, Flint, under the direction of state officials, turned off the darkening water that it had relied on for the drinking water that it had relied on for nearly 50 years. The city planned to join a new regional system called the Carragnondi Water Authority, and while it waited for the KWA to be built, it began bringing in its water from the Flint River. McCathern didn't pay much attention to the politicking around all this. He had enough to worry about with his busy parish. But after the switch, many of his neighbors grew alarmed at the water that flowed from their kitchen faucets and shower heads. They packed public meetings, wrote questioning letters, and protested at City Hall. They filled clear plastic bottles in their taps to show how the water looked brown or orange and sometimes had particulates floating in it. Showering seemed to be connected with skin rashes and hair loss. The water smelled foul. A sip of it put the taste of a cold metal coin on your tongue. But the authorities said everything was all right and you could drink it, so people did, McCathern said later. Residents were advised to run their faucets for a few minutes before using the water to get a clean flow. But as the months went by, the city plant tinkered with treatment and issued a few boil water advisories. State environmental officials said again and again that there was nothing to worry about. The water was just fine. Whatever their senses told them, whatever the whispers around town, whatever Flint's troubled history with powerful institutions telling them what was best for them, this wasn't actually hard for people like McCathern to believe. Public water systems are one of this country's most heroic accomplishments, a feat so successful that it's almost invisible. By making it a commonplace for clean water to be delivered to homes, businesses, and schools, we have saved untold lives from what today sound like antiquated diseases in a Charles Dickens novel: cholera, dysentery, typhoid fever. Here in Flint, it was instrumental in turning General Motors, founded in 1908 in Vehicle City, as the town was known, into a global economic giant. The advancing underground network of pipes defined the growing city and its metropolitan region, which boasted of being home to one of the strongest middle classes in the entire United States. McCathern is a tall, bald man with a thin mustache and a scratchy rasp in his baritone voice. At the time of the water switch, he had led the non-denominational Joy Tabernacle Church for about 15 years. It was founded in the YMCA in downtown Flint, where it held baptisms in the swimming pool. But in 2009, it made a home in Civic Park, where a Presbyterian church closed after 85 years and gave its sanctuary over to the young and hopeful congregation. By then, Civic Park, one of America's oldest subdivisions, was a desert of deserted, historically significant homes, the pastor said. Built between 1917 and 1919 by General Motors and DuPont and Company, along curving tree-lined boulevards, the tidy houses were designed for Flint's auto workers and their families. But over the years, the neighborhood was blighted by vacancy. Empty two-stories with lurching front porches and crumbling roofs sat alongside crisply painted homes where Flint residents, they sometimes call themselves Flintoids or Flintstones, still live their lives. When the sound of gunshots on the street outside interrupted services, McCathern gave a nod to the church musicians, urging them to play louder. Some called Joy Tabernacle a thug church, he said, but McCathern saw the good. The young men filling his pews built a proud society, if not by getting their names on the honor roll, then by tagging their names with spray paint. In the end, people just want to be seen. The ghosts of the past went well beyond Civic Park. Between General Motors and the United Auto Workers, the city had been a flourishing hub for American innovation. There were more than 100 different manufacturing establishments in town. 10 of them employed at least 1,000 people each. And they not only made automobiles, but paints, varnishes, tools, dyes, cotton, textiles, and a wealth of other products. Flint had one of the highest per capita incomes in the entire nation. And despite being severely segregated, it was a magnet for African-American migrants from the South. When Vice President Hubert Humphrey stopped by during the campaign for the 1964 presidential election, he praised Flint for, quote, zooming ahead with unbelievable growth and progress. Workers earned wages that are very good, Humphrey said, and, quote, because of the great labor management program in the community over many years, there has been a constant rise in the standard of living, end quote. Away from the assembly lines and the executive suites, the people of Flint felt that the city just shouldn't be a place to work. It should also be a place to thrive. Charles Stewart Mott, an auto pioneer who became GM's single largest stockholder and three-term mayor, created a nationally renowned community schools program that provided education, skills-building workshops, and social influence and social services. The book, The Poison City.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy Monday. We got a beautiful spring day here in Portland. I hope it's the weather's good where you are. A lot in the news, a lot coming up on our program today. Our entire second hour is going to be a National Progressive Town Hall meeting with Congressman Khanna of California, taking your calls for the hour. In our third hour, we've got a half-hour interview with Nicole Perlroth, and I think you're going to find this fascinating. She's written a book about the cyber weapons arms race. The subtitle is "This is How They Tell Me the World Ends," and it's pretty startling and very thought-provoking, and I think you're going to very much want to hear this. The Derek Chauvin trial is ongoing, and Debbie Hines will be with us at the end of this hour to give us an update, our legal analyst, to give us an update on what's happening in the trial today and what we can expect going forward. So that's all the stuff that is right at the top. I've got a pile of news here to get into, but I wanted to start out with GOP cancel culture. I really think that this is, there's this thing called projection, right, in psychology. And projection is when you assume that other people are doing things because you yourself would do them. And let me just get this straight, right? By the way, I laid this rant out over at HartmannReport.com this morning, where you can read it for free. And with no ads. So let me get this straight. Republicans tried to cancel democracy in Georgia, and then they got called out on it. And so now they're trying to cancel Coca-Cola and Delta Airlines. Even Donald Trump got into the act, saying, no more Diet Coke, right? If you believe that, it's like, right. The guy who lied to his wife and lied to the voters and lied about it on his taxes. Yeah, right. Anyhow, according to Fox News, this all has something to do with left-wing cancel culture. The simple reality, again, this is projection. The simple reality is that for 60 years or longer, Republicans have been doing everything they can to cancel everything in America that isn't either white, male, or associated with a gun. I mean, go all the way back to the 1960s, when Lyndon Johnson and Democrats in the House and Senate were trying to get past the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. And conservatives were like, oh, no, you can't do that. Right. And in fact, in 2013, in the Shelby County case, Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court said, yeah, we'll go ahead and gut the Voting Rights Act. No problem. No more. Obviously, there's no more racism in America. We just elected a black man as president. But this goes way back. I mean, the Republican cancel culture is really grounded in the entire Republican campaign to gut the American middle class. Now, I've laid out in the past for you, and I won't recite it again, all the reasons why the Republicans wanted to gut the middle class, but mostly it had to do with the, quote, social upheaval of the 60s. And the early 70s, whether that was the Roe v. Wade decision, whether that was school busing, coming out of the 1954 Brown v. Board decision, whether that was hippies smoking pot and being opposed to the war, whether it was black people demanding equal justice and the right to vote. I mean, all of these things were seen by conservatives as the negative outcomes, the women's rights movement, the women's liberation movement, as the negative outcomes of the middle class getting too wealthy. And so they declared war on the middle class in the 70s. And Reagan institutionalized that when he became elected. And so, this is this long sordid history. For example, if you're old enough, you remember in the 60s and 70s, there was this whole thing around the metric system. President Kennedy wanted us to move into the 20th century and adopt the metric system like pretty much every other developed country on earth had done. It would standardize science, right? I mean, we've had, I don't recall if that plane crashed or if it merely had to land with no fuel. But that happened a while ago because there was a mix-up between liters and gallons and filling the plane. I mean, it's the world is standardized except for us, right? So Chuck Grassley in 1977 gave this famous speech on the floor of the House. This is when he was a member of the House. He's now a senator. He said, forcing the American people to convert to the metric system goes against our democratic principles. That was back in the day when Republicans actually used the word democratic. But Reagan followed through in 1980. We had already signed numerous treaties going all the way back to 1866 about the metric system. And Reagan canceled that as part of his plan to try to undo anything Jack Kennedy had done. Seriously. This was the new dictum for Republican presidents, is just erase everything the guy before you did. This is why Reagan took the solar panels off the roof of the White House. That was one of his very first official acts. The Republican Party during the Reagan administration was trying to cancel two Supreme Court decisions, Roe v. Wade and Brown v. Board. Brown v. Board, mandated the integration of our schools. Roe v. Wade allowed women to get an abortion nationwide. And so Reagan hired this young, white, rising star lawyer into the Reagan Justice Department and said, figure out a way to get around these decisions. And he wrote this long memo saying, Thomas Jefferson and Abraham Lincoln were right. The Supreme Court doesn't have the final say. Congress has the final say. It's right there in the Constitution, Article 3, Section 2. All you have to do is pass a law saying that you are overturning, essentially, these two Supreme Court decisions, and that's it. Well, the Reagan administration ended up not doing that because it was just political dynamite. Plus, they were raising so much money over the idea of being able to end abortion that they couldn't actually do it. Right? They had to keep the issue out there because it was a huge fundraiser for them. So John Roberts, who is now the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, who was that lawyer who worked for Ronald Reagan back in the 80s and came up with this idea of how to cancel Brown and Roe, he's still around.
They've spent the last 60 years trying to cancel workers' rights to unionize. And now that Joe Biden says, hey, let's build back America better using union labor, the Republicans are like, oh, no, we're going to cancel that. They tried to cancel unemployment benefits. Remember, in the middle of the COVID crisis, this is like June or July of last year, Donald Trump and the Republicans were proposing a budget that would have canceled hundreds of millions of dollars out of unemployment benefits. Throw millions of people who were getting unemployment benefits off the rolls. They tried to cancel Social Security. They've been working on that so hard that the guy who is running the Social Security Administration right now, who's a holdover from the Trump administration, slow-walked the data over to the Treasury Department so that, a lot of people who are, particularly on Social Security disability, but a lot of people still haven't gotten, or just in this week are going to get their COVID checks a month late. And meanwhile, you've got right-wingers on radio and TV going, well, I proves the Biden administration's incompetent. They don't even know how to get the damn checks out. I mean, they've been trying to cancel our children's future and our grandchildren's future by promoting climate change or stopping anything that might do anything about climate change. Why? Because the fossil fuel industry is pouring cash into them. Same thing with guns and the NRA. They've been trying to cancel your right not to be shot. When Reagan was elected governor of California in the 1970s, the first thing he did was cancel free education in that state. He became president, and now we've got free education, college education canceled all across the country. And with Trump and his MAGA followers, his whole MAGA movement, their big effort was cancel democracy. To hell with what happened in the election. We're going to put this strongman dictator Donald Trump in charge, and that'll be the end of that. I'm telling you, this is projection. Now, you watch Fox News and it's, what's the latest left-wing cancel culture outrage? Right. They are assuming that Democrats would do what they have been doing for, most of my lifetime. Anyhow, more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
There is news on the COVID front. There's news on the statehood front. I've got a bunch of stuff to share with you after the break. Stick around. And welcome back. Scott, listening on X-Ray FM in Portland. Hey, Scott, what's up?
Hey, thanks, Tom. I was going to call you last week, but I didn't get through a real quick one that was just about how the energy that we use in this country to generate electricity, only 35% of it actually becomes usable electricity due to transmission and generational losses. So going back to your point that you were making briefly, that Jimmy Carter was right. We need solar panels on the roofs of our houses, and we don't need to rely on an electric grid moving forward. But if I can, Scott, before you continue, I had not seen that 35% stat. What I had seen, and I wrote about it in Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight, is that the power line losses across the United States, just the power line losses, the electricity lost because we have central creation of power and then we transmit it over long distances to get it to people, was a total of 17% of all the electricity produced in the United States. Is the balance to get up to 35%, the other, what would that be, like 13% or something? No, whatever it would be, 18%. Is that because we're making heat and then converting that heat into electricity? Is that the inherent inefficiency of boiling water systems, whether they're coal-fired or whether they're nuclear? Yes, this comes out of an article from UT Texas, Austin, and it's including generational inefficiencies as well as transmission losses. But,
right.
Yeah, so it's, when they say, oh, well, nuclear power is a bridge to the future. No, that's not it either.
Yeah.
My point was that I saw that the New York Times came out with a story about how the last president, I won't say his name, was double dipping with the people getting their donations where they wouldn't check the box and they would have to repeat donations. And I was going to say that listeners to your show know this because you brought this up, about a month or so ago. And I was going to say it was first actually broken on your show by the crack investigative team of Flintstone and Rubble.
You're absolutely right. Fred Flintstone kept getting these emails from Donald Trump,
right.
and the little boxes were, yes, double my donation and make it every single week, and they were pre-checked, and I repeatedly. I mean, I was getting, like I said, 5, 6, 7 of these solicitations a day. And at least 2 or 3 times a week for several months, I would point this out on the air and go, where's the outrage? When are the Republicans going to figure out that Donald Trump is running a con on them? And it was just crickets until yesterday. The New York Times finally figured it out.
Yeah, well, it's hit the fan. One of the guys was a pensioner that clicked yes for a $500 donation, and they took another one the following day, and then several more for the next coming weeks. And he's saddled with like a $3,500 bill, and they were going to supposedly they gave some of it back. It's like $100 million they said they gave back, and Jason Miller, his little melon-headed talker, said, that's only 1%. It was only 1% of the donations that we did that. It's like, oh, really? $100 million you're giving back? That would mean you took in $10 billion if that was 1%. So, and Don Jr. just bought a new house in Florida, and
for what, $9 million?
Yeah, seven,
I mean, these guys have been running a huge grift, and there's hundreds of millions of dollars missing from the inaugural fund through the re-election campaign. It's just gone. Nobody knows where it went.
That's it. Well,
yeah, there you go. Thanks, Scott. Thanks for listening. We'll be right back. Coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. See, if only they'd listened to us, we could have prevented all this disaster. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Ask a boomer what it was like going to college back in the 60s and 70s and whether they had to go into debt to do it. And odds are they'll tell you that they not only didn't have to go into debt, in fact, college was free in California until Ronald Reagan became governor. Not only did they not have to go into debt, but you could pretty much work your way through college just with a part-time job. That is very much no longer the case. Only 8% of millennials and Gen Xers have never had a student loan. This is a crushing burden on these two generations, and it's time to clean it up. And when Americans were asked, what do you think? Should we just wipe the slate clean? Should we get rid of all this student debt? 60% of Americans said yes. And then, of course, the corollary to that would be, and then let's make college free, at least state colleges and community colleges. There's a whole video about this over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program. You can check it out there. And welcome back. Pile of stuff in the news here. I just want to pop through a few things, and then we can talk about what's going on. The cable companies. I was just those of you listening on commercial radio. I was just reading an ad for one of our sponsors, ExpressVPN.com, that provides security. You can when you're online, you can surf the web and whatnot without your internet service provider tracking down what you're doing, and now there's this, Joe Biden is proposing $100 billion for broadband around the country that will not be run by private for-profit corporations who will snoop on you and sell your data like happens right now for most of us, but instead will be run like Chattanooga, Tennessee, where the city provides the broadband, doesn't snoop on you, and gives you better quality, faster speeds at a much, much lower price because they don't have to. I mean, just ask yourself, how did Comcast, this little regional, cable company and internet service provider down in Georgia or Florida, how did they end up like owning NBC? Well, it's very, very profitable to be an internet service provider and a cable company. So anyhow, the cable industry is going nuts, or the internet service providers. They've hired this guy, Michael Powell, who used to be the head of the FCC during George W. Bush's administration. Remember him? And he was the Republican chairman of the Federal Communications Commission. And this is what he said. The idea that the private sector and profit incentives are intrinsically unsuited to do the job, that's the phrase that was used by one of the people on TV advocating for Joe Biden's plan. You know, if you want the largest number of people to have the fastest internet service possible, you don't want private companies providing it because they're just going to be trying to, you know, skim money off the top to give to their stockholders and their CEOs and they're going to sell your information. So anyhow, he says the idea the private sector and profit incentives are intrinsically unsuited to do the job is surprisingly Soviet. Right. And then a Biden official said, if we're going to put billions of public dollars behind this effort, we need to do it in a way that sets it up for decades to come. Amen. Broadband is infrastructure. Meanwhile, the war on democracy continues. Texas is considering a bill very much like Georgia's. Similar legislation, over 300 pieces of similar legislation have been introduced in over 47 states. And now corporate America is saying, we're not going to support these guys who hate America, right? Right. Over the Associated Press News, AP News, Brian Sladisko writing the headline, kind of says it all. Corporations gave over $50 million to voting restriction backers. AT&T was one of the most prolific. They gave $800,000 since 2015 to authors of these proposed restrictions. Other top donors during the same period include Comcast, Philip Morris USA, United Health Group, Walmart, Verizon, General Motors, and Pfizer. These donations, these $50 million in donations, quote, helped cement Republican control in state houses. Right. So when are America's corporations going to get their act together? In the COVID area, I did want to bring this to your attention. The British variant of COVID, which is far more contagious, is ripping through Michigan, France, and Germany right now, and is starting to spread to other parts of Europe, and is also starting to spread to other parts of the United States. It's not only more contagious, it's easier to catch. You need a lot less virus and a lot less exposure. So 6 feet may not be enough. What we thought was good ventilation might not be enough, but it's also more deadly and against younger people. So now we've got 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds who are getting sick and ending up in the hospital being intubated and dying, as opposed to just 70 and 80-year-olds. Now, part of the reason why 70 and 80-year-olds are not dying at the rates that they were is because they're getting vaccinated really fast. But, we're still only roughly one-fifth, about one-fifth of Americans have had at least their first vaccine. But there's this new mutation, it's called EEK. It's the E484K mutation. The scientists call it EEK. And and it's another variation. It's a brand new mutation. And it's now spreading through Japan. 10 out of 14 people who tested positive at the Tokyo Medical Hospital in March had that variation. None of them yet have the British variation. So this is mutating all over the world, which is not a good thing. And in the face of this and this massive health crisis that's coming with it, legislators in Florida who are looking at a $2 billion shortfall this year in their budget have been offered by the federal government, Joe Biden and the federal government, saying, if you just expand Medicaid in your state, make it available to everybody, 90% of the money comes from us, we will wipe out your budget deficit. And they're saying, no, we don't want to do that. Instead, we're going to cut $251.2 million out of Medicaid reimbursements for hospitals. We're going to cut $77 million out of the critical care fund for low-income people for health care. And we're going to reduce by $22 million the amount of money that Medicaid pays for over-the-counter drugs. Right.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I don't know if you saw the thing in 60 Minutes over the weekend about DeSantis and his whole pay-for-play, you get the vaccine thing. But, it's like, hey, if you're rich in Florida, you're in Fat City. Otherwise, nah.
Today we're reading from Behold America by Sarah Churchwell, The Entangled History of America First and the American Dream. This is from the prologue. On Monday, 30 May 1927, a cool day with showers forecast, New Yorkers were gathering for the annual Memorial Day parades around the city. It was only 9 years since the end of the European War, into which America had been so reluctantly drawn and Europe had suddenly become closer than ever before. Precisely 10 days earlier, Charles Lindbergh had completed the first solo flight across the Atlantic in the spirit of St. Louis, and no one had yet stopped celebrating. Front pages around the country reported that Lucky Lindy had been mobbed in London, greeted by rapturous crowds of 150,000. Few Americans were talking about much else than the newest national hero, but in New York that day, different kinds of mobs were about to gather. Around 8 a.m., a group of Italian immigrants living in the Bronx set out for the elevated train on their way to Manhattan to join the parade. But they were not going to honor the American soldiers who had died in the service of their country. They were supporters of Mussolini, planning to join 400 American fascists who were marching in Manhattan's Memorial Day parade as part of the official fascist movement in the United States. They had been invited by the parade's organizers, to the outrage of many anti-fascists, including Italian nationalists and anarchists who threatened violence if the invitation wasn't rescinded. It wasn't. Like all his fellow fascists intending to march that day, Joseph Carisi was wearing the black shirt uniform, sporting leather boots, jodhpurs, a black cap, and carrying a steel-tipped riding crop. When he stopped to buy a newspaper, Carisi was jumped by two men, stabbed in the neck, and left to die on the sidewalk. Another fascist, Nicholas Amoroso, who was running either to catch up with his group or away from the killers, reports vary, was shot 4 times, once right through the heart. One of the 2 murdered men had served in the American Army during the Great War, the other with the Italian Army, papers reported. The parade they had meant to join took place without them, a fascist delegation of several hundred that was guarded by police to, quote, avert disorder. After the parade, the American blackshirts returned to their headquarters in the heart of Times Square. There, another of the fascists standing outside was set upon by 3 men. He defended himself with his riding crop as his fellow blackshirts charged out brandishing clubs and whips, chasing the assailant through the theater traffic in Times Square, who fled as the black-shirted mob tore through the traffic. 100 fascists, reported the New York Times, rushed the attackers. A melee ensued that was quickly dispersed by the police. There was also violence in Brooklyn, where a parade of fascisti marched from the Angelo Rizza Fascista League at 274 Troutman Street in Bushwick. The LA Times reported several hundred men were parading, including 40 or 50 in the black shirt uniform. Fights broke out between supporters and protesters mingling on the sidewalks, and an anti-fascist was found lying on the ground, stabbed in the back. He survived and identified a fascist as his assailant. Accompanied by 30 police reserves to forestall violence, the marchers made their way through Brooklyn, stopping at the Wilson Avenue station, where the fascisti came to attention and gave the fascist salute. They ended at a Roman Catholic church, where the priest blessed them under large American and Italian flags, while the police remained on guard. The biggest outbreak of violence that Memorial Day, however, occurred in Queens, where it centered around a different right-wing group, not Italian Americans, but the self-proclaimed 100% American kind. By 1927, the Ku Klux Klan had spread across the United States since its rebirth in Georgia 12 years earlier. The first Klan was formed in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War, as former Confederate soldiers in Tennessee created a secret society to promote white supremacism, and terrorize the newly freed slaves in the South during the Reconstruction era. The name is generally believed to have originated from the Greek word for circle, kuklos, while Klan pays homage to the mystified Celtic heritage supposedly shared by white Southerners. Within a decade or two, the first Klan had been successfully suppressed by law enforcement and died out by the turn of the century. But in 1915, it was resuscitated in Georgia, and by the early 1920s, the second Klan had achieved a powerful political presence in the United States, not only in the South, but across the country. I would add this is because of 1915, the movie Birth of a Nation came out. The Klan had an active presence in New York City and Long Island by 1927, with favorite slogans, which they even attempted to copyright at various points. That year, the Klan was calling attention to the fact that it first announced the program of 100% Americanism and of America First. They were not, in fact, the first to adopt these mottos, as this book will show. In 1927, both phrases had been around for a decade or more. But as far as the Klan busily copywriting hate was concerned, America First belonged to them. And on Memorial Day in Queens, 1,000 or so of them had gathered to march, many in white robes and hoods. They were accompanied by 400 women from the so-called Khanna, the feminine branch of the Klan. Some of the reported 20,000 spectators in Queens that day objected to the Klan's presence as others defended their right to march. Scuffles broke out, and it turned into a riot. Women fought women, and spectators fought the policemen and the Klansmen as their desire dictated, said a newspaper. Klan banners were shredded, and 5 of their number were arrested, said initial reports, while a few others were caught up in the confusion as well. The book, Behold America, Sarah Churchwell.
On this week's Science Revolution, will America hold Trump and his enablers accountable for 400,000 unnecessary deaths? Is this manslaughter, now that Trump brags that he actively ignored the scientific advice? Professor Richard Wolff is here on rising food prices and the impact on global unrest. If prices continue to rise on top of the pain of the pandemic, the world could be in for a bumpy future. Plus, vaccine passports? Let's just call them right to life or freedom passports. After all, what red-blooded, Nazi armband-wearing, Confederate flag-waving, Capitol invading, gun-toting American patriot could possibly object? Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. We are live. It is Monday. It's a beautiful spring here on April 5th in Washington, D.C., in Portland, Oregon. And Sean was just telling me that the first 10 minutes or so of our show, for reasons that we have yet to figure out, our satellite provider tossed on an old best of show. Well, not old. It was my last conversation with Congressman Pocan. My apologies. We'll figure out what happened and try to make sure it never happens again. It's just, what can I say? But anyhow, I'm here. And the lines are open at 202-808-9925. If you missed my opening rant, I know that this appears to have only affected the commercial radio side of our program. If you missed my opening rant, it was based on an op-ed I wrote this morning over at HartmannReport.com. And basically what I was saying is that Republicans are accusing Democrats of cancel culture when they have been trying to cancel everything from Social Security and unemployment benefits and a woman's right to have an abortion and the civil rights laws and the voting rights laws and Jimmy Carter's efforts to take America off off its fossil fuel addiction and Reagan canceling Carter's solar panels and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, the real cancel culture is really founded in the Republican Party, but it's pretty mind-boggling. So, but anyway, because apparently the first 10 minutes kind of got blown up, I will simply declare today, for the moment anyway, and again, keep in mind, in the entire second hour of our program is going to be Congressman Khanna. We're going to do a national town hall meeting, a progressive national town hall meeting with him. He'll be taking your calls. And Debbie Hines is going to join us in about 15 minutes and give us an update on the Chauvin trial in this hour. And then in our third hour, we're going to have this amazing conversation about the fate and future of internet, what would you call it? The Internet of Things, how warfare may happen in the 21st century using the internet. And this is, there's a new book out about this that is just mind-boggling. The Great Britain is debating, apparently Boris Johnson, who has had COVID, wants there to be vaccine passports in the UK. And so this is becoming a hot topic there because they're getting the same, pollution of their social media, some of it homegrown, much of it coming from outside the country, from countries that are not democratic and don't like democracy and are just trying to mess with democratic countries. France is getting a lot of this. Germany is getting a lot of this. Holland is getting it now. Oh my God, masks, that's Nazism, that's communism, that's tyranny. Can't have that. And now it's vaccine passports. Oh, my God, it's show me your papers, please. Right. What happens to my right to not get infected with your disease? I mean, this is a right. George Washington was the first U.S. president. He wasn't even president. It was 1776. He ordered all of the troops under his command in the Revolutionary War to be vaccinated against smallpox. He ordered it. Massachusetts ordered smallpox vaccinations in 1809. It was upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court. It has been repeatedly upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court. That's why schools can mandate vaccinations. So a vaccine passport, it's like, stop your whining, please. Anyhow, picking up some of your phone calls here. One of the things I mentioned in my rant, by the way, was that Republicans have been trying so hard to cancel the Social Security Administration that the existing head of it, who used to work for Trump, he was put into place by Trump. Biden has not yet gotten around to replacing him. He slow-walked the Social Security data over to the IRS, so some people are still not getting their checks. And the right wing is all in a froth about the incompetence of the Biden administration. Mike in Lomita, California. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Hey, Tom, a couple of topics from your rant. One is about, quote, private corporations that steal your data, unquote. And the other is about complaints about the COVID checks not getting out to people, and the right wing blaming it on Mr. Biden. Well, I found out what a big part of the problem is, and that is that there's a Trump boondoggle where they turned over payment of the second stimulus checks for $600 to a private corporation, which is issuing supposedly debit cards. I found this out the hard way because my tax refund, my tax preparer, unbeknownst to me, had claimed the $600 on the tax form. And when it came back last week, it was $600 short. And I didn't at first put the two together. But after calling the IRS, I found out that this private firm has been mailing out these debit cards without warning to the recipients, and they look like junk mail, and people are throwing them in the trash, as probably I did, and my brother did it back in Kansas. So used the 800 number provided for this outfit. And in the first place, you go through several sentences in English before you even get to the choice for Spanish. So if you're a Spanish speaker, good luck. You're going to be discouraged and give up, quite possibly. I gave up after a while because all the choices on the robotic phone tree led either to the call being hung up on or no progress at all, because the choice that you need to make is for your card has been compromised. There's no choice for I never got it or I threw it away. How do you know if you threw it away? How do you know if you even got it? So that's what's been happening with a lot of our second stimulus checks. And this is
from months ago.
Well, at least a month ago, I think. And this, for a potential, there are 160 million people roughly eligible for this, which comes to $96 billion potentially for people who don't have direct deposit information with the IRS.
That's amazing. So Trump, it just makes sense that Trump would have privatized the system. Oh my God, Mike, thank you for the heads up on that. And jeez, I appreciate it. I don't know what else to say other than oh my God, of course. Yasha in Imnaha, Oregon. That's a town I'm not familiar with. Hey, Yasha, what's up?
Imnaha is a little teeny place in the road that I guess the town motto is, where the hell is Imnaha? I'm next door to Hell's Canyon, one ridge over. So my query is why I am not hearing the independents, progressives and Democratic Party talking more about what the cost of not pursuing the infrastructure repair and the jobs bill, what the cost of not repairing infrastructure. All they hear is about, it's going to cost so much. Oh, but, budget, blah, blah, blah. I'm not hearing anything about, well, yes, but if we don't, I want to hear those figures.
Yeah, the cost of the cost of lost productivity, the damage to cars from potholes. Although there's probably a whole industry.
Not only that, what I'm thinking is education is a bit critical. Our children are our future. We are so at risk of infiltration and attack on our electrical grid, on our communications grid. We are so far behind the times. We are so far behind in broadband access for everyone. There's no access where I live.
Yeah, and we will be getting into that.
I don't have that.
In considerable detail. We'll be getting into that in the third hour of the program. Yasha, thank you. That's an excellent point. I appreciate the call. Michelle in Kansas City, Missouri. Hey, Michelle, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I just want to mention that I'm so sick of hearing the words child prostitute, teen prostitute. Children and teenagers cannot negotiate contracts, much less negotiate a contract for sex. So it should be what it is, child rape, teenage rape. When they put child prostitution, and teen prostitution, it makes it more clean. So like these kids were doing this for money. So I just wanted to put that out there. I think we should just stop saying those terms because it's not what it is. It's rape. That's all it is. And Tom, thank you very much for educating me, and thank you for my time.
And thank you for educating me, Michelle, and all our listeners. I completely agree with you. Your point is well taken. Jack in Phoenix, Arizona. Hey, Jack, what's up? Oh, well, Jack, I'm sorry. I'm going to put you on hold because we're going to hit a break here in about 10 seconds, and I was not paying attention to my clock. My apologies. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 45 minutes past the hour. Just a reminder, on the other side of this break, in about 5 minutes, Debbie Hines is going to be with us, and she's going to give us an update on the Chauvin trial for the murder of George Floyd. So stick around for that, and we will be back in just a few minutes right after this. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. And welcome back. Sharon in Minneapolis. Hey, Sharon, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I was wondering if they may look into the possibility that Noah Green, they mentioned that he's a college student and he was a football player. And I was wondering if TBI may have played a part in his mental illness.
I don't know the story of this person. I'm sorry, Sharon.
The guy that ran into the barricades?
Oh, yeah, the guy who killed the police officer in Washington, D.C. last week. So your speculation was that he might have had what? Traumatic brain injury?
Traumatic brain injury from playing football.
As a consequence of what?
College football.
Oh, yeah. That's amazing. Yeah. I remember hearing that he was a football player on the news, and I hadn't put two and two together. Yeah. He was clearly not rational, right? I mean, if you're trying to attack the Capitol building in a little car with a knife, trying to attack the Capitol building in and of itself is not rational. But B, if you're going to do it and you think you're going to have any success in a little car with a knife, you're really delusional. And, there is some speculation that what he was trying to do is commit suicide by cop. And traumatic brain injury would provide a good explanation for that. That's an interesting question. Yeah, Sharon, thank you. Thank you for that. It hadn't occurred to me. It's brilliant. Jack in Phoenix, Arizona. Hey, Jack, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I just wanted to call and, man, commend you on your being, as far as the you wearing a mask in my business are you taking the vaccine to come to my business? I just want to back you up. I know you had a lot of callers call in and was like trying to make you just trying to be a government man to make everybody take a vaccine, but you had a perfect point. If you want my bid or you want to come buy my bread, wear a mask or take a vaccine to come in my shop. And I have
it's all American. We've got this slogan: no shoes, no shirt, no service. I mean, just add no vaccine to that, right?
That's it, And I just want to back you up. I seen you get about 50 callers in last week steady saying Thom Hartmann want to take my rights. Nah. Thom Hartmann saying what I'm saying, Jack saying in Phoenix. You want to come in my place, baby? If you want to infect my kids or my customers, look, I don't need the money that bad.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you.
Jack, do you mind my asking what your business is?
Oh, we're in the recycling business out here in Phoenix.
Oh, that's great. That's great. That's important stuff.
And I'm up here working actually now, but I keep hearing earbuds all day. But this is something like I was listening all week between you and the trial, and you kept getting callers in that kept saying like, Thom Hartmann, how you gonna make me? You didn't say make them take nothing. You said if you want to come visit the Thom Hartmann show, have a mask on and have your vaccine. You didn't say whatever they want to do at home, And
you can't just go door to door with a gun and say you will take the vaccine, but you can. Every business in America, and I think airlines probably are going to be, and cruise lines are going to be at the front of this line, can say no, ain't going to happen. But now Ron DeSantis issued an executive order down in Florida forbidding companies from requiring a vaccine in order to, for example, get on board a cruise ship. This guy's just shooting himself in the foot. Jack, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So the Republican Party has sold themselves all the way back to the 60s, really, as the serious party. We're the party of issues. We take stuff seriously. We have serious policy analysis. We have serious constitutional analysis. We are serious about the economy. We have all these think tanks, Heritage and Competitive Enterprise and Cato, and we've got the Federalist Society finding serious judges that we can put on the federal bench, and in response to 4 dead Americans, they got real serious. 5 House committees, 2 Senate committees. They created a separate House Select Committee for 4 dead Americans. That was Benghazi. Thousands of hours of testimony. The Secretary of State testifying for 8 hours straight. But when 5 people die at the Capitol, not so much. Got a new video about it over at ThomHartmann.com. Let's check in with Debbie Hines, our legal analyst and a former trial lawyer, former assistant attorney general for the state of Maryland, former prosecutor. IamDebbieHines.com, her website and her Twitter handle. Debbie, welcome back. So, what's the latest on the Chauvin trial, and where do you think it's going today? I know that they've been getting testimony from the ER physician. I caught that before I went on the air. What's up?
Okay, so Tom, actually, right now, one of the most exciting testimonies to date is occurring because it's with the Minneapolis police chief who's testifying now. When we came on, he was pretty much just going over his credentials and how he got into the force and, just kind of sort of more foundational stuff. But this is the officer, the chief who fired Chauvin right away because it was so egregious what happened. But before him, we had the doctor at the hospital, Dr. Langenfelder, I think his name was, and he was the young attending resident who was the one that took Mr. Floyd, now we know his body, into the hospital as after the EMT and the ambulance took him there. Kind of have to look at some of my notes because he was kind of very technical as opposed to just speaking directly in what we call layman's terms, so everybody can understand what he's talking about in terms of the medical jargon. So I'm hoping the jurors took notes as well. But he said it was highly unlikely that Mr. Floyd died as a result of a heart attack, which is what the defense is trying to claim, and that he said it was no fluid around the heart. They got really technical as to what you look at to tell if an individual has succumbed due to a heart attack, and that he did say that it was more or less likely that it was his cause of death was due to oxygen deficiency, the very thing that Mr. Floyd was screaming out for more than 30 times, that he couldn't breathe. And he also addressed the defense's position that Mr. Floyd could have died from excited delirium, which has to do with the drugs in his system. And he refuted that theory as well. That there was nothing there to indicate it. But it's interesting on the excited delirium, even though he disputed that theory, that's one of the things that Chauvin said when he was speaking to his lieutenant, or that the lieutenant said that Chauvin said that, George Floyd was just acting crazy. Meanwhile, we all know that that's not true from the video. But I think that's what they're trying to, allude to there. So he was strong in the sense that he did say that Mr. Floyd definitely had an oxygen deficiency, and that was the likely cause of his death. The cross-examination really didn't do too much with him. They discussed the fact that George Floyd did have 2 times more than normal amount of carbon dioxide in his system, and that a healthy individual would have had a significant amount less. So I'm sure that once they get to their, meaning the defense position, they're going to actually point to some type of respiratory problem that they believe that George Floyd had. So all in all, I mean, Dr. Langenfeld, he came on, he did what he had to do. He's a young resident at the time, so even though he's a doctor, there's no doubt about that, but he still is a younger, physician. So I think they're just trying with him to just lay the foundation of what happened. Mr. Floyd, we know what happened at the scene. He was taken in the ambulance, and then the ambulance took him to the hospital. So they're just trying to pretty much lay that foundation. But there's really, most of what's going to happen is going to coming up now with the chief of police as well as with the other medical doctors, because actually the case is primarily probably going to rest on causation as to what was the cause of death, and that would be due to whatever the medical doctors and the actual medical examiner testifies about, which is yet to come.
Right. So my understanding of what I caught this morning too was that had he been able to breathe normally, he wouldn't have had high levels of carbon dioxide in his bloodstream, number one. So that kind of validates his I can't breathe. And number two, if he had been high on drugs and was having a drug freak out, which is what Chauvin had told a bystander immediately after the case, as I recall, he probably would have been sweaty, because that's consistent with drug delirium, and he wasn't sweaty. He, so there was no symptoms of any of the stuff that basically Officer Chauvin and his buddies were claiming were the justification for dragging. Again, we have to remember, they dragged him out of the car after he was already restrained, handcuffed, and locked in the back of a police car. They dragged him out, put him on the street, and killed him.
Exactly. And that, we may never know what that's about because Chauvin didn't testify, but as to why they didn't get him back in the car, he was already handcuffed and in. And even though Mr. Floyd was saying that he was feeling a little bit claustrophobic, when have the police ever been concerned about someone being claustrophobic when they put him in a paddy wagon, or in this case, put him in the back of a car? So that just, I just think that it is what it is, and we're going to see if the jury can believe everything that the prosecution has set forth. But again, most of the cases are really going to hedge on the causation, and so I think that what the defense is going to do as we're seeing these next few witnesses come up is basically to determine if they can get one juror to be the one juror that can hang it, or if they can get a lesser charge conviction on manslaughter versus the murder charges. That's where we're headed.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Debbie Hines, trial lawyer, IamDebbieHines.com, and on both .com and also on Twitter, I am Debbie Hines. Debbie, thanks so much for dropping by again.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. We'll be right back with Oh, we're going to have the next hour, Congressman Ro Khanna.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. X-Chair, changing the world one seat at a time. More information at xchairtom.com. Bloomsy Box, simply better blooms. More info available at bloomsybox.com, code TOM. And Boll & Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bollandbranch.com, code TOM.
And welcome to the Thom Hartmann Book Club, Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Tears We Cannot Stop, A Sermon to White America by Michael Eric Dyson, who was a guest on our program a while back. This is from page 86. One of the great privileges of whiteness is not to see color, not to see race, and not to pay a price for ignoring it, except, of course, when you're called on it. But even then, the price pales quite literally in comparison to the high price black folk pay for being black. We pay a price too for not even being able to derive recognition and financial reward for the styles that make the world want to be black so bad that they don't mind looking like us as long as they never ever have to be us. If the appropriators can freely rip off our culture with no consequences, those who revise racial history, the fourth stage of white racial grief, are even less accountable for their deeds. The way of the racial revisionist when it comes to black life and history is simply to rewrite it. Their motto is, it didn't happen that way. There's a flood of writing that tells us that the Civil War wasn't really about slavery, but about an effort to defend states' rights. But, my friend, you've got to put yourself in our place and see the absurdity of such a claim. Defend the rights of states to do what? To enslave blacks. But even here, the irresistible logic of whiteness, that is irresistible to whites themselves, and to all of us who are subjected to white whim, springs into full action. White American history is so powerful that even when it loses, it wins, at least in skirmishes within whiteness itself. From the right wing, there is the belief that the Civil War was fought over the ability of individual states to beat back a federal government out to impose its will. From the left wing, there's the belief that the Civil War was a conflict between the planter class and the proletariat. In each case, race as the main reason for the war is skillfully rewritten, or really written out. Slavery is rewritten too. Some white Christian apologists contend that black folk needed slavery to save their souls or to rescue their cultures. A contemporary twist on this argument radiates in thinkers like Dinesh D'Souza, who claims that American blacks brought here through slavery are now doing far better than their African kin. Some white critics argue that since blacks sold other blacks into slavery, bondage was a black man's problem, not a white man's burden. But revisionists would much rather describe the dehumanization of black folk as little more than a commercial transaction. It's another way of washing their hands of racial responsibility. The effort to rewrite history surfaces in how Malcolm X is treated in the mainstream. It hardly seems likely that the culture he fought with all his heart could be depended on
to grasp his true meaning. Malcolm is often read as an apostle of violence, as a frightful figure consumed by destructive rage. Yet the truth is far more complex, and Malcolm was far more complicated. But isn't the autobiography of Malcolm X so enduringly appealing because it shows Malcolm giving up hatred as a means to racial justice? Now, Malcolm X believed in the liberation of black folk from the mental and psychological chains of white supremacy. He was not committed to nonviolence as a way of life or as a method of social strategy. He believed that such a commitment prevents the full realization of black emancipation. Yet he was not personally violent. As Ossie Davis says in his eulogy, responding to the claim that Malcolm preached hate and was a fanatic and a racist, quote, "Did you even talk to Brother Malcolm? Was he ever himself associated with violence or any public disturbance?" End quote. The rage that flowed in Malcolm's veins was the rage against a force of whiteness that aimed to wash its black kin from the face of the earth. The urge to rewrite black history occasionally gives way to the final stage of white racial grief, which is simply, when it comes to race, dilute it. That is, to argue that black stuff doesn't just plague black folk. To summarize, bad stuff happens to everyone. This argument surfaced in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, and that storm certainly hit black folk, but it hit white folk too. This is the sordid version of reverse American exceptionalism. It is the same Me Too impulse that flares in the bitter battle against affirmative action. Beloved, I can't help but notice that affirmative action is the bee in so many of your bonnets. You look around in your classrooms and you think every black person is there because they got an unfair shake from the system. You look at your job and you think that your black coworker got an unjust nod of approval from the powers that be. You never stop to think how the history of whiteness in America is one long scroll of affirmative action. You never stop to think that Babe Ruth never had to play the greatest players of his generation, just the greatest white players. You never stop to think that most of our presidents never rose to the top because they bested the competition, only just the white competition. White privilege is a self-selecting tool that keeps you from having to compete with the best. The history of white folk gaining access to Harvard, Princeton, or Yale is the history of white folk deciding ahead of the game that you are superior. You argue that slots in school should be reserved for your kin because, after all, they are smarter, more disciplined, better suited, and more deserving than inferior blacks. That's like concluding that the Cleveland Cavaliers can't possibly win the NBA championship because they're down 3-1 to the Golden State Warriors. Throw in the towel and call it a series. But they must play the series to determine the winner. Whiteness is having all the advantages on your side. The referee's blowing the whistle for you. The arena packed with only your fans. In fact, whiteness means you never even have to play the game at all, at least not in head-to-head matchups with the talent and skill of black folks. Here's We Cannot Stop by Michael Eric Dyson. Khanna. He represents the 17th District of California, the Silicon Valley area, and is a vice chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. His website is Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. His Twitter handle is RepRo, R-O, RepRo Khanna. And he will be with us for the entire hour, taking your calls at 202-808-9925. Congressman Khanna, just to kick it off, what's on your mind? What are you looking at right now, or what in particular would you like to share with our listeners to start the show, or the hour?
Well, two things, Tom. First, the infrastructure bill that President Biden has put forth, we need to make sure that it's bold enough, that it goes big enough. The reality is that $2 trillion over 10 years is not enough to have the investments in the smart grid that we need, the $2 trillion, frankly, that we need just in solar and wind generation. And if you look at it, $2 trillion is what we spend just in 1 year in one bill on COVID relief. and the pandemic had a negative impact of $16 trillion. Well, climate change is going to have even a bigger negative impact. So we need to anticipate that and make the critical investments now. And second, of course, it's horrific what's going around the country in terms of voter restrictions. We have to get H.R. 1 passed morally, substantively, to give people equal rights, but also electorally. I mean, Speaker Pelosi has said, and I agree with her, that we will not be able to compete fairly in 2022, 2024 if we let Republicans continue to disenfranchise voters.
So I totally agreed. With regard to the infrastructure bill, I know, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has been probably the most outspoken in the media anyway, saying $10 trillion over 10 years is really where we should be at on this. Do you have a specific opinion? And how do you think this process is going to play out? The Biden administration, I believe yesterday, was very clear in saying that this is still a process and we haven't arrived at any final numbers.
Well, she's right. I mean, $10 trillion is not just a number she pulled out of thin air. It's a number that a lot of the environmental groups, Sierra Club, the NRDCC, the Sunrise Movement, Senator Markey have said is necessary. Frankly, it's the down payment. It's not even sufficient to have the investment in renewable energy, in energy efficiency, in storage that we need to have any chance of meeting the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change target to not have temperature rise above 2 degrees. So she's not just making this stuff up. She's pulling the numbers that the experts have come up with, and she's pointed out that we've spent almost $5 trillion in 1 year on COVID. So we have the ability to do this if we have the political will. I think that Biden is still in a fluid process. The challenge is I just hope the fluidity doesn't go the other way. What I'm concerned about is that they do something just for roads and bridges and something too narrow, and we lose a lot of our priorities. So it's a struggle right now to make sure that the fluidity means that progressives have our priorities in there and not that the bill is further is restricted.
So last question, and then we'll pick up our calls. So does that mean that now is an important time for people to be calling 202-224-3121 and asking for their particular member of the House or their one of their two senators and saying we need a bigger infrastructure bill, please?
Well, Tom, as you know, I can't encourage people to lobby their members, but what I can say is this. This is the critical 3-week period that's going to determine whether we go bold and big on infrastructure or whether we're going to have a narrow bill. And narrow, not just trying to get Republican votes. We could have a narrow bill because that's what the administration thinks is doable in terms of our caucus's appetite for taxing the rich and taxing corporations. So when we're making this argument as progressives, we need to make it clear that, yes, we want to go big, and two, we support revenue raising by getting corporations that have often been paying 0 or under 10% tax to pay a bigger tax, what they owe, and to raise taxes on the ultra-rich, the wealthy, which they can afford. Just one quick point. I didn't realize the details of this. I'm sure you know, Tom, because you've followed all this economics. But if you are, let's say, have $1 million of stock, and then you keep that until you pass away, and the stock goes up to $10 million, and then your heirs inherit that $10 million, they don't have to pay capital gains on the $1 to $10 million. They get the $10 million without any of the capital gains. That's a huge loophole that Bernie Sanders and others are saying, let's close. Like that, there are ways to raise the revenue, and we need to make clear that we have the resources if we close these loopholes.
That's amazing. Okay, let's pick up our phone calls. It's our National Progressive Town Hall meeting with Congressman Ro Khanna. Dale in Springfield, Missouri. You are on the air with Representative Khanna.
Congressman, glad to talk to you. Congress needs to direct the IRS to fix their Get My Fund website. I never got the second stimulus, and all the website would say is either needs more info but doesn't tell you what it needs, or not eligible, but I know I am. I still haven't received the third stimulus check, and once again, all it says is needs more info or not eligible. Please get the IRS to fix this. You managed to get the Social Security Administration off their butt and send its info to the IRS. And I know you guys can do this. Me and many others, we're low-income retirees, and I can't wait until next tax year for another tax credit. Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you, Dale. Very eloquent. And please contact your congressman in terms of your specific stimulus check, or contact us and we'll put you in touch with your member of Congress. But you're absolutely right. I mean, I was smiling because I've been saying this over and over again, that the digital design of our websites of federal agencies is atrocious. When the pandemic started and you went to the CDC website or some of the initial websites, they had about 60 different things you had to click on to figure out what you actually needed. And it took people actually working to simplify that design and just have 3 boxes. And your experiences suggest that we haven't figured it out for getting money to people. Now, this is inexcusable, because if you go on Apple's website, or if you go on Google's page, or if you go on Airbnb, they figured out that they have design that works for consumers. Well, if the private sector can do it for consumers, the government should be able to do it for citizens. Frankly, that should take priority, and we ought to get this figured out.
Smitty in Molahai, Hawaii. You're on the air with Representative Khanna. We have about a minute and a half to the heartbreak.
Obi-Tom Kenobi and Jedi Khanna. Congressman Khanna, I want to talk about the Democratic messaging. Why I suggest that maybe you and Eric Swalwell, Ted Lieu, Barbara Lee, anytime you're in front of the camera on MSNBC and CNN, put forth the Thom Hartmann challenge and ask the pundits and the viewers what the Republicans have ever done to help the working American person like myself.
Thank you, Smitty. I've been running this contest for 15 years, Congressman. If anybody can name one piece of legislation written by Republicans, introduced by Republicans, passed by a majority of Republicans, signed by a Republican president, whose principal beneficiary is average working people, I will give them an autographed book of their choice that I've written. No one has won this contest in 15 years.
Well, Tom, I think it's a great way of framing it. And Smitty, to your point, I do think the Democrats have to be a little bit more assertive and turn the tables in these cable news interviews. And I love the line, and we'll try to work it in when I'm on.
There you go. Okay. It's 15 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Ro Khanna, Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, representing the state of California in the U.S. House of Representatives. Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov is his website. You can tweet him at Rep, as in Representative, Rep Ro, R-O, Khanna. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's Second Hour Monday, our National Progressive Town Hall meeting with Congressman Ro Khanna. Stick around. And welcome back. Howard in New York City. Hey, Howard, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah, hi. The Republicans and the Conservatives have about 2,500 broadcast stations that spend about $3 billion getting all their crazy men lies messages across. Democrats have 1/10 of that. How are we going to break into the 50 million conservatives who believe these lies if we have no broadcast power?
Well, you're right, and Tom and I have talked about this before. There's the issue of how are we getting into people's homes on television with local news and what the conservatives have in terms of an advantage there. There's the issue of what we're doing in terms of the radio, and then there's the issue of what we're doing in terms of print, local rural newspapers, and local organizing. And so I think it's no longer that the Democrats are losing on message. We're actually losing on what we're able to, the mediums where we're able to communicate. And we have to expand radio, we have to expand television, we have to expand print, we have to expand actual organizing in these communities.
Jim in Riverside, California. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi. I would like to find out how people can find out about the second, in particular, the second stimulus relief monies, people who have not received that. And I understand there's a great deal, millions of people who haven't. And those people don't know how to try to get it. I was one of those people, and I was proactive enough to contact my congressman, and he referred me to the IRS. They told me that they called me and told me that I had to file my 2020 taxes. I know that there were a lot of people, as like myself, who were just waiting for the money based on information we had received about who qualifies, and that would have been based on 2019 taxes. How do people find out? There's, I'm sure, millions of people still who haven't received that money and are wondering, well, I guess I just lose.
Jim, you raise a very important point, and this is about the breakdown of communication between our government and people. And we try. I mean, I tried sending out an email multiple times to everyone in my district saying, here's how you qualify, contact us. We posted on Facebook, we posted on Twitter, but there's still a lot of people who are not on those mediums, who aren't getting the emails, and we're unable to do in-person town halls. So it's a challenge. All I can say is that all of us as members of Congress need to be more adept at getting the message out. I think the IRS needs to have a much better designed website, as we discussed earlier, and make it very easy for people to figure out what they need to do. But you raise a problem. I guess if there are callers here, I would just encourage you contact your member of Congress. Contact us, and we'll put you in touch with your member of Congress if you haven't gotten.
There was an earlier caller who said that Trump had privatized the distribution of the checks with the second stimulus, and that a private corporation was sending out debit cards to people. A lot of people thought it was junk mail and were throwing it away. Do you know about that?
I don't. I mean, I can look into it. Maybe that is part of the problem. I mean, it would make no sense to try to privatize that.
His theory was that he had thrown his away, and therefore he got lost. You know, he fell out of a queue or something like that. Anyhow, we'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So there's a new study that has, this is not peer-reviewed, but it is in preprint. It is being peer-reviewed as we speak, where the scientists were looking at the ability of the COVID virus to jump from the human species. You know, it started with bats, and then it apparently went to pangolins and then to humans. To jump from humans to other species, which would be a big problem. If we can infect other mammals, you know, our cats and dogs, if we can infect rats or mice, who have traditionally been disease vectors for all kinds of things, from the bubonic plague to hantavirus, if we can infect them with this virus, we've got a whole brand new problem. And sure enough, they have found that these two variants, B351 and P1, both can infect mice in the laboratory. And they say this abrogation of the species barrier represents, you know, a serious problem. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. Congressman Khanna taking your calls for the hour. Harry in Waukegan, Illinois. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, hello, Congressman. Thank you for taking my call. I had a question. One is, is there anything going to be put in, checks and balances put in place as far as this Build Back Better for building infrastructure? It's a great idea because it stimulates the economy, takes federal funds and puts them back in the pocket, and of course they get spent. But not only that, to the other colleagues on the other side of the aisle and not wanting to give away money, is there any checks and balances as far as we don't want to bail out particular states that don't invest in their infrastructure? Or
Sure. Harry, I think what you're saying is, how do we ensure that the money actually gets spent in the infrastructure improvements, whether it's roads or bridges, airports, ports, expanding broadband, the smart grid. It needs to be something productive. And I actually think that when it comes to that, President Biden is in a good place to achieve that, because he was very concerned about how the recovery money was distributed. It didn't always go into projects fast enough. It didn't create jobs. One of the interesting things is 75% of these jobs are going to be for people who don't have a college degree. I think that's the priority for the president, and he's going to appoint someone once we get the bill through who's going to ensure that the money is well spent. But it's something that I think he will be top of his agenda.
Wayne in Las Vegas, you're on the air with Representative Khanna.
Good day, distinguished gentlemen. Say, I was wondering, my point is, has anyone thought of using similar tactics that the Republican Party uses to restrict abortion and voting rights, and use those tactics for restricting some gun sales? Things like restricting the number of places you can buy a gun. You know how they're now making it the physician's responsibility, and they could be, if they're breaking the law because of certain regulations, they're held responsible. We could make the gun salespeople responsible. The best one I think of is, why don't we use something like the Republicans are using on voting? Anyone can challenge someone's right to own a gun, which would automatically trigger a universal background check.
Or make them watch a video of people being killed by guns, like they make women who want to get abortions watch videos. Congressman?
Well, a lot of these are very reasonable regulations on guns and not taking away people's rights. Here is the problem. It literally comes down to the composition of the Supreme Court. Because what happens is when you have those restrictive violations of voting rights, which should have been struck down under the Voting Rights Act, you have the Roberts Court basically gutting the Voting Rights Act. You have the Roberts Court not striking down restrictions on a woman's right to choose where they should. But when it comes to guns, even very reasonable restrictions, the analog of going through a metal detector when we board an airplane, the court overreaches and strikes down as an infringement on the Second Amendment. So until we can have a reform of the court or have a better balanced court, we can have your strategy, and we should encourage it at the state level, because at the federal level, nothing gets passed through the Senate. But my fear is what the courts will do.
Robert in Philadelphia, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Oh, hi, Tom. Congressman Khanna, I want to ask you about the proposal that Rashida Tlaib offered in the House and that Bernie Sanders put forward in the Senate that would increase the tax rate on corporations on a graduated scale according to the disparity between the CEO's salary and the median salary within each firm. So I know in the 1960s, CEOs made on average just 20 times the pay of their company's average worker. And currently the average CEO makes 320 times the pay of their company's average worker. And so this would impose, say, a 0.5% tax increase on corporations whose CEOs make 50 times what their company's median employee makes, and then it would go up on a graduated scale up to a 5% increase on corporations whose CEO makes 500 times what their average worker makes. And this is, I would just note that at Walmart, the ratio of the CEO's salary to the average worker's salary is 983 to 1. So can we expect that bill to pass the House soon?
Well, I'm sympathetic to the idea of having the corporate tax rate tied to the differential between CEO pay and median worker pay in some form, and I think that should be some part of our tax proposal to pay for infrastructure. The one caution, and I think the details matter, is you don't want to encourage some of these companies to just engage in outsourcing and shedding people on their payroll to manipulate that number and going to independent contractors. So it has to be coupled with a stronger classification of employees and a way to prevent that kind of manipulation.
Wow. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour. It's a National Progressive Town Hall meeting here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Representative Khanna, the Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, taking your calls for the hour. Khanna.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna.
Our book today is Can We All Be Feminists? It's a collection of essays edited by Jane Eric Udori. This first chapter, first essay, is from Charlotte Shane. It's called No Wave Feminism. If you feel like feminism is failing you, you're not alone. I sometimes have the impression that I'm as thoroughly feminist as I am thoroughly human. The feminism is as intrinsic to my contribution to my constitution as my skeleton is to my body. But in my 35 years, I've struggled with or outright rejected feminism on several occasions. First, as an ignorant adolescent, what do women need feminism for if they already got the vote? Then, as a sex worker who saw how regularly and even gleefully feminists stoked the public's long-standing antipathy toward professionally sexual women. And now again, as someone moving even further into the far left, who cannot abide the forms of feminism that embrace and are complicit with the worst aspects of liberalism. The more I learn about the intersecting oppressive forces that continue to shape the Western world, colonialism, patriarchy, capitalism, xenophobia, and racism, and the network of cruel social machinery to which these systems give rise, incarceration, crippling debt, disenfranchisement, deportation, and so on, the less sense it makes to use gender as the primary lens through which to regard human-engineered suffering. Feminism doesn't feel like the sharpest weapon to wield against white supremacy or border policing, for instance, or even the best tool with which to approach basic civic concerns like vibrant schools. That's not because those issues don't impact women. Obviously, they directly and indirectly impact many, but they don't necessarily impact women more or in dramatically different ways than they do men. In other words, the most significant challenges these issues present aren't tethered to one's sex, and so prioritizing gender above other aspects of identity limits one's realm of ethical responses. Here's an example. American prisons often keep female prisoners shackled while they give birth. There are variations on the theme. Some women are shackled during labor, some are unshackled, but then shackled again almost immediately afterward, and almost all are shackled while heavily pregnant. There's some variation of what shackling entails, too. It can mean being cuffed at the wrists or at the ankles, or both, or cuffed to a hospital bed or chained at the waist. Articulating these details makes the sadism even starker. A class-action federal lawsuit in 2017 alleged more than 40 women at the Milwaukee County Jail suffered this horror. It was preceded by lawsuits in 2014 and 2016 against that same jail for similar practice. But the appalling practice is hardly confined to one city or one state. In 2015, New York prisons were found to be shackling prisoners in labor in spite of a state law that made it illegal to do so. And according to a 2016 report by the Prison Birth Project and Prisoners Legal Services of Massachusetts, jails and prisons in Massachusetts were guilty of similar violations. Most feminists probably agree that this is a feminist issue. The topic accordingly receives coverage on feminist websites and sometimes in women's magazines. But does a feminist obligation to attend to the rights of the imprisoned extend only as far as pregnancy and labor? Or is it a feminist issue when a non-pregnant woman is shackled? Or when she is caged for years and exploited for her labor, denied face-to-face visits from loved ones, held captive in a compound in the name of, quote, justice? If the answer to these questions is yes, then it is also a feminist issue. Then is it also a feminist issue when men are shackled during various health emergencies, seizures, say, In 2014, a male inmate in Colorado died after undergoing several seizures while in restraints and receiving no medical treatment. Is it a feminist issue when incarcerated men are denied the right to visit with family or exploited for their labor? Is it a feminist issue when so many men are raped while in prison? Or does feminism's responsibility begin and end with gender-based mistreatment? The feminists hired by prominent media outlets often advocate for measures that would result in higher levels of incarceration. They write op-eds in favor of further criminalization around sex work and call for longer prison sentences for men convicted of assault, which we've known for decades is not necessarily synonymous with men who committed the crime. They also disturbingly relish the theater of sentencing, like that enacted by Judge Rosemary Aquilina, who told serial sexual abuser Larry Nassar that if she could, she would allow some or many people to do to him what he did to others. So sexual violation is an atrocity unless it happens to the right person. They capitalize on women's justified fear and anger around mistreatment by men to shore up the status quo, to suggest that our current problems are not the result of fundamentally unjust institutions, but rather institutions that are only incidentally sexist. That means that those same institutions could become less so with the right adjustments, like more draconian sentencing for crimes against women or more female judges. But the prison system is racist and brutal by design, not by accident or mismanagement, just as the court system regularly fails the most vulnerable because it was built to protect the powerful. The challenge of the 21st century is not to demand equal opportunity to participate in the machinery of oppression, revolutionary thinker Angela Davis has written. Rather, it is to identify and dismantle those structures. Yet leveraging our existing legal system for criminalization remains the go-to strategy for most feminists when it comes to dealing with objectionable behavior. The book, Can We All Be Feminists?
On this week's Science Revolution, will America hold Trump and his enablers accountable for 400,000 unnecessary deaths? Is this manslaughter, now that Trump brags that he actively ignored the scientific advice? Professor Richard Wolff is here on rising food prices and the impact on global unrest. If prices continue to rise on top of the pain of the pandemic, the world could be in for a bumpy future. Plus, vaccine passports? Let's just call them right to life or freedom passports. After all, what red-blooded, Nazi armband-wearing, Confederate flag-waving, Capitol invading, gun-toting American patriot could possibly object? Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Congressman Ro Khanna, Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, representing Silicon Valley area of California in the U.S. House of Representatives, on the line with us for the hour, taking your call. And Dave in, whoops, let me click the button correctly. Dave in St. Charles, Illinois, you are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Tom and Congressman Khanna. I just have one question. It's a quick one. Now, just suppose we change the filibuster and get H.R. 1 passed. Can't the Supreme Court nullify it?
Dave, I mean, technically the court could. I do think it would be a stretch even for this Supreme Court, given that there is nothing in the Constitution that refers to the filibuster, that was a creation of Calhoun. And so even if you're an originalist, it would be a hard justification. Not saying I'd put anything past the court, but it would really be a enormous stretch for them to have that kind of a decision.
Robert in Frankfort, Michigan, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, Congressman Khanna. My question considers voter suppression. It's my understanding that all ballots have a number that identifies you. Why not require that the voter get a ticket that can check a voter, that you can use to check a voter database online to see if his vote has indeed been suppressed or not? And I got one more point too that no one's thought of.
Well, Robert, in California, actually, you could track your ballot. So when I mail my ballot in, I can check online, and they verify that the ballot has been counted. So I think that kind of infrastructure is in the works in states, and to the extent that voters can have a way of verifying that their ballot is counted, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, same thing here in Oregon. I think that's pretty widespread. Tom in Rapid City, South Dakota, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Thank you. I have a question for Congressman Khanna. I'm an over-the-road truck driver and a progressive, and I get in all kinds of arguments with truck drivers and the Republicans about the House bill that is similar to the AB5 bill in California. How is the bill, the national bill, going to handle owner-operators that traditionally and absolutely own their own equipment and run their own business? Are we at risk based upon that legislation?
Well, Tom, first of all, thank you for calling. And one of the things I love about this show is the diversity of perspectives we get as opposed to often national television news. But you're not at risk if it's a legitimate small business. So in your case, if you actually own the equipment, if you are actually running it as a small business, then you're not at risk. You become at risk if it is a pretext, if there's someone else who's telling you what hours you need to drive, lending you the equipment, basically having an employment relationship where you're not your own boss, then you should be treated as an employee so you can get the benefits of that work. But if you actually are calling your own shots, have your own equipment, get to set your own hours, then the legislation doesn't affect you.
Tyrone in Fort Myers, Florida. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, Congressman. I'm a student that just graduated, got a BA after 40 years of not going to school. And I have a pharmacist here in town that was had his license revoked because the DEA said he was a pill mill. There's similar cases like this going around the country happening to black pharmacists where there's people who work for Walmart or other chain organizations having the same accusations made to them, but they're not getting their license revoked. Up in Tampa, they had a gentleman that sold 300,000 pills over a six-year period of opioids, and the pharmacist across the street, which is a chain, sold 24 million, and they accused the black pharmacist of being a pill mill. Is there a way to get the DEA investigated on these things? Because it's definitely an unequal process that's going on as far as they're labeling these pill mills. These doctors are above reproach, and it seems to be happening heavily to black pharmacists more so than anyone in the Walmart chain. Matter of fact, Walmart sued the DEA, and the only reason why they stopped their pharmacists for prescribing these different drugs was because they were being accused of it. The DEA never took their license or stopped any of those doctors, those doctorate of pharmacy, from dispensing these pills. They just made accusations. But with the black doctors, they took all of their licenses and ruined their businesses. Can anything be done about it?
Well, first of all, Tyrone, what a great story. I admire your resilience that 40 years later you got a BA. That's an incredible American story. But I completely agree with your perspective. And it's not just in this case of pills and opioids. The history of drug laws in this country has been about selective enforcement, has been targeting black communities, brown communities. And the latest manifestation of that is in the enforcement of opioid laws. Now, I'm all for going after the Sacklers, going after the people who made record profits on peddling lies. But when it comes to particularly small pharmaceutical companies, one, the laws need to be equally applied, and two, let's go after the real perpetrators, not people who are way down the food chain. And so I certainly am happy, along with colleagues, to look into the issue you raise, which is selective application of these laws targeting the black community.
Patricia in Portage, Wisconsin, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah, hi guys. I am calling to ask Mr. Khanna to lead the Progressive Caucus in addressing the mass extinction of species, since half of life on Earth is being extinguished by us, and animal agriculture is the huge culprit, and we still have wildlife services killing our millions of our wildlife unbelievably across the nation for animal agriculture to graze our public lands for hardly anything, if anything at all. we really need someone to lead on extinction. It took Bill McKibben 30 years to get climate change to the top. Now we don't have 30 years to get extinction addressed. And we can't just kill millions of animals for fun in every state every year with hunting and trapping. I mean, something has to be done now. Or,
I'm sorry. I thought she was done when she said no. Congressman?
Well, I appreciate your concern for animal welfare, for animal rights. Senator Booker and I actually have a farm reform bill, which I hope you'll look at, which talks about having systematic reform and how livestock are handled, having certain, one, it's against consolidation, but also in introducing certain standards of humanity, of animal welfare in there. And then I think there is an interesting development with synthetic biology and other technology advances that are now able to replicate exact meat or actually produce meat without even needing some of the animal or animal cruelty. So I definitely think that there are reforms that we can have in this area.
Ed in Roselle, Illinois, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yeah, hi, Congressman. I'm wondering if Tom's idea about getting rid of the tax on Social Security is gaining any traction in the Democratic Party. I think it's morally the right thing to do, but I just think it's an absolutely outstanding idea to get the attention of people who normally don't pay attention during the midterms.
And let's call it the Reagan tax on Social Security.
Yeah, no, I know this comes up, Taba, a number of times on your shows. The experts are concerned about that. If we do that, how are we going to fund Social Security and whether it gives people an excuse to cut it? What I have supported, though I understand the appeal of such an idea, what I have supported is scrapping the cap so you can tax people who are millionaires on all their income that is not being currently taxed to increase Social Security benefits. So what I would do for working class and middle class families is increase their Social Security benefits.
Okay. We're talking about the income tax on Social Security. Prior to 83, Social Security benefits were not taxed. After 83, they're now subject to income tax. That's what he was talking about. Or did you get that?
That's what. So you're saying that none of that is going towards funding of Social Security?
No, it just goes into the general fund. It's just income taxes.
Yeah. Well, let me ask again, because last I asked the Social Security Works, who helps on a lot of these issues, they said, well, it can create this issue of funding. But you're right. I mean, if it's going on the income tax, it's going to the general fund. So let me clarify that.
I mean, maybe there's a FICA tax. I don't know. I'd have to look at my own Social Security statement. But maybe there's a FICA tax there as well. But the concern I think is the income tax, because it used to be that there was no income tax on Social Security, there was no income tax on unemployment benefits, and I know the income tax on Social Security came about in 83 as a result of Reagan's so-called reforms. And, well, you could say some of them were actual reforms. And then on unemployment benefits, I believe that was during his presidency. But
I'm going to look into it.
Great. Thank you, Congressman. We'll be back. It's 45 minutes past the hour on the Thom Hartmann Program. Back with more of your calls for Congressman Ro Khanna, Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, representing California's 17th District in the U.S. House of Representatives. Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Ro Khanna.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's our National Progressive Town Hall meeting with Congressman Ro Khanna. Back with your calls for the Congressman in just a moment. And welcome back. Jerry in Tomah, Wisconsin. You are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, gentlemen. I had a question about windfall elimination that the congressman had mentioned about a week ago. And I wanted to know if there's a website or something I can kind of keep up and follow what they're doing on it.
Sure, Jerry. It's a bill in Congress that many of us are on that basically says if you were in the private sector and you're earning Social Security, then you go into becoming a teacher or into public service, your Social Security benefits on that prior earning should not be reduced because of your choice to go into public service. And there's a bill that many of us have introduced to try to correct that. Actually, right now it's so odd that if you were to stop working, your benefits wouldn't be reduced, but if you go into a public service profession, your benefits are reduced.
Jeff in Martinez, California. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hi, guys. I just wanted to find out whether it was a good idea. I got my stimulus, and it was on a little ATM card, and it had fees and things. And I thought to myself, if we just take that card and we put it all into an account, like let's say a good credit union account, when we get it, we don't pay any of the fees, and people who are unbanked might well become banked and not have to use payday lenders and such. Don't you think that'd be a good idea?
Jeff, it's an intriguing idea. I know in California what we're trying to do is actually provide universal financial services by the state to those who are unbanked so that there is no one who doesn't have basic banking facilities because the commercial banks view them as too much of a risk. So what you're proposing, I think, could be part of that solution. But I do think that the state has an obligation to provide banking services for anyone who doesn't have them.
Jeff in Portland, Oregon. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hey, good day, Tom and Congressman Khanna. Thanks, as always, for the great town hall. Congressman Khanna, along with widespread food insecurity and our lack of national health care, I believe the exploding homelessness crisis, particularly here on the West Coast, is our greatest moral failing as a society. Like you say, the infrastructure bill should be bigger and bolder. And besides building new affordable housing, don't you think there should be heavy funding for converting and rehabilitating motels, hotels, even empty office buildings? In other words, let's get the most number of people off the street as quickly as possible. Thank you, Congressman.
Yes, Jeff, and I think that the most comprehensive bill is Senator Elizabeth Warren's, who would provide significant grants for the retrofitting, redesign of buildings, to the funding for social housing construction, funding for affordable housing construction, and grants to cities to say you can use some of this to improve your infrastructure or build more schools so that you don't have the restrictive zoning policies. But you're absolutely right that it is a huge issue. And in my district in California, one of the biggest issues in terms of the lack of housing and homelessness.
Do you expect, we just have 15 seconds, do you expect Congress to do something about that in this term?
I do. I don't think it's going to be part of infrastructure, but I think after that, it definitely is going to be a priority.
Yeah, it's got to be that members of Congress are hearing from their constituents on this. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Ro Khanna, Vice Chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, taking your calls for the hour in our Progressive Town Hall meeting. You can check out his website at Khanna, KHANNA.house.gov, and you can tweet him at Rep Ro Khanna. We'll be right back. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So a while ago at Davos, Michael Dell, the computer billionaire who started out selling computers out of his dorm room in college. I was running CompuServe forums back in the day. This is in the late 70s or the early 80s, and he was selling them on CompuServe in my forums. And, now he's worth billions. And somebody asked him, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is proposing a 70% tax bracket for people who make the kind of money you make. What do you think of that? And his response was, a 70% tax rate? Name a country where that ever worked. Ever. And it turns out there is such a country, and apparently Michael Dell didn't know this. I think a lot of Americans don't know this, that there was a country that had its greatest period of prosperity in its entire history, with a top tax rate that was above 70%. In fact, it hit 90% for more than half the time. And that was the United States of America. It's a new video over at ThomHartmann.com. Congressman Ro Khanna taking your calls for the hour. Ernie in Chicago, you are on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, thank you for taking my call.
That point about paying no taxes on the $10 million that it grew to, that's incorrect. A person, their portfolio, when they die, that's the value at the date of death. That's the value of their portfolio. They do not pay anything on that part when they inherited $1 million. Anything above that, when they go to sell it, that's what you pay on. So if somebody got $1 million and then they sold it at $10 million, they would pay on the $9 million. That's all I have to say. Thank you for taking my call.
Yes, but you're right about that. But if they don't sell it, let's say you bought the stock for $1 million and you let it sit in your estate and it goes up to $10 million. Obviously, if you sell it in your lifetime, you pay the capital gains. But let's say it goes up to $10 million. Now your daughter inherits it on your death. Your daughter would start with the stepped-up basis at $10 million. And then let's say your daughter sells it at $15 million. She would only pay capital gains on the $5 million, from $10 million to $5 million, but we would have lost the appreciation from $1 million to $10 million. What this incentivizes is a lot of people holding assets until the time of their death to avoid paying the capital gains tax rate. It actually makes it harder to increase capital gains tax rates to ordinary income, because if you have this loophole, what you would do is incentivize more and more people to putting their money into these estates as a way of getting the money to avoid capital gains tax. So it's a fix that we really need to do, and I'd recommend for listeners going to the Van Hollen and Sanders have just introduced a bill to eliminate the step-up in basis exemption.
Sharyar in Silver Spring, Maryland. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Hello, Congressman Khanna. A big fan of yours. I know you're all for cancel student debt. Let's see if that happens or how it can happen. But what about all sorts of other things that can be done? Public service loan forgiveness is something that can be improved. I've seen bills from, I think, Gillibrand and others to incrementally make that lower instead of the current all or nothing. You can reduce income-based repayment down from 25 years down to maybe 20, 15. There's all sorts of other measures. I'm all for cancel student debt, but other things can be worked on simultaneously, too.
I agree with you, and I think that absolutely should be an option. Look, I took out a large amount of debt to go to law school. The law school I went to had fancy programs that if you went into public service, they would help pay off your debt. I don't understand why that can't be the case across the country. It shouldn't just be something reserved if you go to an elite law school. So while I think we ought to be eliminating the enormous burden of the student debt on working and middle-class Americans, I'm all for reform to get us there.
Mark in San Francisco, you're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Yes, Congressman, wouldn't it be right to say that the infrastructure plan will pay for itself by putting more people to work and expanding the tax base and doing something to do about our debt?
Mark, that's what Robert Reich called demand-side economics. It's actually much better than supply-side economics. I mean, there's a myth that you're going to have tax cuts leading to economic growth. Doesn't work. It turns out when you have productive investment, it does often lead to economic growth that generates revenue. But there is a way where we could say it's going to generate revenue, and even if we're being very conservative about that, we can have strategic cuts in our defense, and we can have increased taxes on the very rich and require them to actually pay taxes and corporations to actually pay taxes. And then you get both the revenue that's going to be generated from increased jobs plus the revenue that we're going to get from the increased taxes to more than pay for the $10 trillion over 10-year investment.
Yeah, that's how Eisenhower paid down the debt from World War II. Maverick in Edmonds, Washington. You're on the air with Congressman Khanna.
Good morning, gentlemen. I don't need an answer to this because it isn't a question. I want to inform you, Representative. There's this phenomenon called rolling coal. And you may have seen a pickup truck going down the interstate near you, and suddenly they stomp on the pedal, and this enormous cloud of soot and particulate matter comes barreling out of the back of the vehicle. Now, I think this is done for entertainment purposes to these pickup trucks. It doesn't come from the factory that way, and it creates a public health hazard. And I think that somebody ought to take a look into this and pass legislation that altering your vehicle to produce extra pollution for entertainment purposes is illegal.
Maverick, seems like common sense to me. I've never heard of this practice before, but I'm happy to look into it. But certainly no one
It's a big thing on the right. It's a big thing. These pickup trucks, and they pull in front of Priuses, and there's memes all over the internet of people doing this to people in electric cars. It's pretty amazing, Congressman.
I mean, the amazing thing is the right often talks about the right to freedom, the right to live the life you want. And what they always forget is that impacts other people's freedom and the right to live the life they want. And this is the fundamental problem in the right's philosophy.
Yeah, I'm with you. Congressman, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Great talking with you. Back at you. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. X-Chair, changing the world one seat at a time. More information at xchairtom.com. Bloomsy Box, simply better blooms. More info available at bloomsybox.com, code TOM. And Boll & Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bollandbranch.com, code TOM.
Say fight back!
Our book today is Future War, Preparing for the New Global Battlefield by Robert, I believe it's pronounced Latif, L-A-T-I-F-F. This is from the introduction. On a sweltering August day following weeks of heightened tension with Russia over its actions in Ukraine and Syria, and harsh words between the United States and China over actions in the South China Sea, and as workers are preparing to depart the cool of their air-conditioned Manhattan office buildings for the gridlocked highways and subways, several large electric power plants along the East Coast simultaneously experienced dramatic overspeed conditions in their large turbine generators. Plant operators are unable to stop the steam turbines, whose automatic control and data systems have been infected by sophisticated computer malware, and they catastrophically tear themselves apart, cutting power to large segments of the population and industries in the Northeast. Building systems shut down, hospitals switch to emergency generators, trains stop running, traffic lights cease operating, and Wall Street trading comes to a halt. At the same time, 1,100 miles to the south, a massive rocket sits fueled and ready to launch a critical national security satellite when an explosive-laden private aircraft flies at low altitude into the Cape Canaveral launch pad area and, despite repeated warnings, slams into the pressurized fuel tank and solid rocket motors, creating an enormous conflagration. Half a world away, elite commandos equipped with the latest high-technology equipment, but unidentifiable as a national army, attack U.S. and allied interests near areas of disputed territory. Thus are fired the opening shots of a new war. These hypothetical events represent a radically different style of conflict fought with new tools and against new and unfamiliar enemies. When most people think of war, they imagine soldiers doing battle with other soldiers, employing tanks, artillery, and other recognizable weapons. However, in this century, war has morphed into something we can scarcely recognize, and future conflicts will be qualitatively and quantitatively unlike those of the past. It will be fought using innovative and unusual weapons, many of which, because the technologies have both civilian and military uses, will be available to far more people who are far less skilled in their employment. The so-called democratization of technology has diminished the monopoly of advanced countries on the tools of war. 21st century armed conflicts often have no battlefield in the traditional sense. The concept of opposing armies clashing in deadly struggle, but moderated by international conventions of behavior, seems a thing of the past. In 1999, Chinese colonels Kuo Liang and Wang Shuangshui predicted that soldiers would increasingly be computer hackers, financiers, drug smugglers, and agents of private corporations rather than members of a military, and that their weapons would include not only airplanes, cannons, poison gas bombs, and biochemical agents, but also computer viruses, net browsers, and financial derivative tools. Their predictions were prescient. Yesterday's wars were, like World War II, about saving civilized nations from maniacal dictators, or like the conflicts in Vietnam and Korea, devoted to a clash of ideologies in the attempt to limit the spread of one hegemon over another. They were big affairs involving large military forces and enormous violence. Today's wars are more about cultural and religious hatreds, using violence as a means to change the hearts and minds of people, among whom the killing occurs with more frequency. Tomorrow's wars will be different still, fought largely for political dominance with stealth and cunning, targeting innocents and institutions, heavily dependent on information superiority, and employing strange new weapons. While we have a highly motivated and well-trained and equipped armed forces that will adapt, we are not prepared as a nation to react well to the inevitably messy and ambiguous situations these new conflicts and weapons will present. We still have no clear idea of what constitutes an act of war in cyberspace now, nor of how we might respond to such an act. It is not enough for the military to be prepared. Neither the public nor its decision makers have yet fully comprehended the significance of the changes in the types of conflict and the tools with which they will be fought. Without question, there will be circumstances when decision makers will find it necessary, or at least think it necessary, to send soldiers into classic boots-on-the-ground combat situations. We will continue to project force with our powerful aircraft, our munitions, and our aircraft carrier strike groups. When war is fought in foreign lands, it could well be against other high-tech armies. However, war will increasingly be more personal and often fought closer to home. It will not lend itself to the traditional massive displays of U.S. firepower. It will affect individuals directly, not as some distant conflict we read about in newspapers or watch in the movies or on the internet. Americans will be targeted on U.S. soil, often, as we have seen in San Bernardino and Orlando, by homegrown terrorists. This form of war will be messy and complex, and it will not lend itself to easy, quick, soundbite solutions. It may not even be clear for a while who perpetrated the violence against us. Was it state-sponsored or a random act of terror? Will we unleash massive destruction on foreign countries in retaliation for attacks by terrorists residing on our own soil? If so, to what end and with what consequences? There are always consequences, whether they be the death or capture of our own troops, unnecessary civilian casualties, or the incitement of more violence. The book Future War by Robert Latif.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the third hour of our program. Over the years, one of the people who has kept me informed as a subscriber to the New York Times about what's going on with cybersecurity around the world has been Nicole Perlroth. She is the cybersecurity reporter with the New York Times, and just came out with a startling new book. I believe the title is "The Cyber Weapons Arms Race," and the headline and the subhead is "This is how they tell me the world ends." Although I may have that backwards, and Perlroth, Perlroth, if you're looking for her on wherever you buy your books online or whatever it may be. But it's just an absolutely extraordinary book. And I'm so pleased that Nicole is able to spend a little time with us on the air here today. Nicole, welcome to the program. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
I was just blown away by your book. The website for the book, by the way, is thisishowtheytellmetheworldends.com, and your Twitter handle is Nicole Perlroth, NicolePerlroth. So let's talk about cyber weapons and cyber arms. First of all, how real is this possibility that the next world war, should there be one, God forbid, is not fought using conventional weapons or even nuclear weapons, that it's fought using essentially the internet?
Well, I think there's no question that cyber going forward will be a core component of any war that we see. Whether we only see this sort of low-level daily cyber conflict escalate into something where we are turning off the lights somewhere or someone is turning off the lights here remains to be seen, but it's entirely plausible. In fact, over the years, I've written about this for the New York Times, numerous instances where Russia has gotten into our power plants. They've gotten into our nuclear plants. Now they've gotten into the business enterprise networks of those nuclear plants. They haven't made the leap into the critical controls themselves. But a few years ago, the Department of Homeland Security published a screenshot that literally showed Russian hackers' hands on the controls at an American power plant. We know that they've turned off the power in Ukraine, not once, but twice. We know that we are actively trying to get into Russia's grid, and we've made a pretty loud show of it. My colleague David Sanger and I broke that story for the New York Times a couple of years ago. So all that we're really missing is some larger geopolitical trigger for one of these actors to actually turn off the lights. And we haven't had that yet, but it seems like every day we're getting a little bit closer to that inevitability.
You open the book with this extraordinary story of going to Ukraine yourself and looking at the devastation of a cyber attack there. Can you recap that for our listeners?
Yeah, sure. So, to me, this was the biggest news story I have covered in my 10 years at the Times that really just did not set in, I think, with readers the way it set in with me and other people in the cybersecurity space. But a few years ago, someone, we don't know who, they call themselves the shadow brokers, appeared on Twitter. This was around 2016, and they claimed to have hacked the National Security Agency. And over the next year, they started dribbling out the NSA's hacking tools. And in 2017, they dumped a hacking tool that the agency called Eternal Blue that allowed code to spread automatically in Microsoft Windows systems, which, whether you know it or not, you use Microsoft Windows. You might not have a Windows PC, but our power grid relies on Windows. Critical systems rely on Windows. Hospitals rely on Windows. So what happened in 2017 is the shadow brokers dumped the NSA's hacking tools online. They were picked up a month later by North Korean hackers that used them in a global ransomware attack, which fortunately the code had been a little sloppy, so someone was able to neutralize that attack pretty quickly. But then a month later, it was picked up again, and this time by Russia in an attack on Ukraine that decimated government agencies' data in Ukraine, that switched off the radiation monitors at the old Chernobyl nuclear site, that kept people from getting money out of ATMs, that kept people from paying for gas at gas stations, paying for train tickets at their railways, kept their postal service from getting packages out to the intended recipients, kept people from getting their pension checks. And it didn't just hit Ukraine. That attack zoomed out of Ukraine and hit any business or entity that had anyone working remotely from Ukraine. So it hit Pfizer, it hit FedEx, it hit Merck. That year, actually, Merck had to tap into the CDC's emergency supplies of vaccines because their vaccine production systems had been affected. It even hit Cadbury egg chocolate factories in Tasmania. It wiped out medical records for people here in the United States. It kept patients from getting treatment. So I went to Ukraine about a year and a half after that attack to just survey the wreckage for what was essentially ground zero for that attack. And I would have gone sooner, but I was pregnant and had a baby right after this happened. But even a year and a half, 2 years later, they were still picking up the pieces from that attack. And I spent several weeks there, and what Ukraine security experts told me that did the forensics for that attack was, listen, this was really bad. This was the most destructive and costly cyber attack in history. It cost victims northwards of $10 billion. It's the most costly attack we'd ever seen. But what they said in Ukraine was, listen, we're not that digitized here. Yes, this affected our ATMs and people's ability to pay for gas and get their pension checks, but our elections are still not digitized. Our hospitals really still are not digitized. People in Ukraine aren't really moving towards the Internet of Things like we have here. They really are far behind when it comes to the virtualization of their critical infrastructure. And so what they said to me in Ukraine was, listen, if you don't pay attention to what Russia is doing in Ukraine, if you don't understand the lessons here, that they are turning off our lights, wiping out our government agencies, paralyzing these systems, then you are in deep trouble, because they believe that the end target wasn't Ukraine. They believe the end target was the United States. And that when an attack of that nature came directly for us, that we would be in much worse shape, because we are so much more connected, so much more wired, so much more virtualized than Ukraine is. And they believed ultimately that that was just a dry run for some future attack on us.
And they did that while Trump was president, knowing that he would not hold Russia to account?
Well, I mean, Trump made it pretty clear that he would not hold Putin directly to account. You know, we all saw Trump standing there in Helsinki saying something to the effect of, Putin said it wasn't Russia. I don't see any reason why it would be. When the entire intelligence agency community and cybersecurity community had determined that it was Russia. So, yes, you know, in some ways, Russia got a free pass on that one, even though it hit so many American businesses and critical infrastructure, too.
Remarkable. Nicole Perlroth is with us. The new book, The Cyber Weapons Arms Race. This is how they tell me the world ends. We'll continue the conversation in just a moment. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Nicole Perlroth, as a New York Times reporter, has written just this absolutely breathtaking book. You have to check it out. So, Nicole, our commercial stations will rejoin us in just a minute, but we're still live on our non-commercial stations and on Free Speech TV and every place else. To what extent is this something that has been largely isolated with regard to, you know, Russia, U.S., Ukraine? as opposed, and in North Korea's the high-profile things that we hear about, North Korea going after Sony. How deep is this? For example, China, India, maybe even some of the lesser-known players, Pakistan, countries. Because we know North Korea has really, strengthened their. I mean, you write in your book about how they recruited, as I recall, hundreds of thousands of people. How broad is this around the world, or is this still something that's unique to a few super cyber savvy countries?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I was given access to some of the Snowden documents back in 2013. And among the documents in that trove that I've reported on was a classified national intelligence estimate from 2009, 2010, which looked at the cyber threat landscape and nation-state capabilities that could come back to attack the United States. And at that time, they were really focused on the usual suspects. China was hacking our intellectual property at a rate that was unprecedented. Russia was the most sophisticated adversary we faced in cyberspace, but until then, most of the attacks we saw coming from Russia were really just traditional espionage and then also a large amount of cyber crime. North Korea and Iran were in a different category back then. They were assessed to be have the motivation and the ambition to do harm using cyber means, but they really lacked the capability. And 3 years later, I knew from my post at the New York Times that those two countries, North Korea and Iran, had come along much quicker than the United States intelligence community had given them credit for. They were nowhere near the sophistication of China or Russia, but what they had pulled off using rudimentary code at Sony Pictures, in attacks on the Sands Casino, which Iran did because they were upset with something Sheldon Adelson had said about the U.S. bombing Tehran. What they were able to do with those rudimentary attacks blew U.S. officials away. It still caused damage. They weren't using the sophisticated techniques that we used here or that China and Russia were using, but they were able to do quite a bit of damage. 8 years later, we are in a vastly different landscape. North Korea is much more sophisticated, fortunately or unfortunately for some. They have determined that their best case is to use cyber as a means to skirt sanctions, which means hacking things like Bitcoin, cryptocurrency exchanges to generate badly needed cash so they can get back to their nuclear weapons programs. Iran was handcuffed by the Iran nuclear deal. So when Trump canceled that deal, we saw a huge wave of new Iranian cyber attacks. And these days, they are the most prolific adversary that the United States faces today. But in doing this book, what I learned is that basically every country on Earth, maybe with the exception of Antarctica, is stockpiling offensive cyber weapons for their own purposes. It might just be surveillance,
please, for just 1 minute.
It might be because they need to reach out and touch someone.
Right. On this week's Science Revolution, will America hold Trump and his enablers accountable for 400,000 unnecessary deaths? Is this manslaughter, now that Trump brags that he actively ignored the scientific advice? Professor Richard Wolff is here on rising food prices and the impact on global unrest. If prices continue to rise on top of the pain of the pandemic, the world could be in for a bumpy future. Plus, vaccine passports? Let's just call them right to life or freedom passports. After all, what red-blooded, Nazi armband-wearing, Confederate flag-waving, Capitol invading, gun-toting American patriot could possibly object? Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. We're talking with Nicole Perlroth, the cybersecurity reporter for the New York Times, author of a mind-boggling new book, The Cyber Weapons Arms Race. This is how they tell me the world ends. The website, thisishowtheytellmetheworldends.com. And Nicole's Twitter handle, Nicole Perlroth. Nicole, how if I could ask you to kind of step into an imaginary or a forward, before we get to that, you were just summarizing for me how 8 years ago, basically, there were just a few international actors of any level of sophistication, and now that landscape has changed. You want to quickly summarize that in terms of cyber weaponry around the world, and then I have another question for you.
Well, I just think just in the last 10 years, every attack that has been discovered, unraveled, and publicized has opened up every nation state's eyes to the potential of using cyber weapons and hacking tools for espionage, for surveillance, and possibly one day for destruction. So even if India might not have a reason right now to turn off the lights in Pakistan, they are in a quickly escalating border dispute with China. And just in recent weeks, we've seen them go back and forth in hacks of each other's critical infrastructure. So every geopolitical conflict today, whether we're paying attention to it or not, is going to have some cyber element. And what I learned is that there are countries in the Gulf that will pay top dollar to any hacker that brings them a way to hack an iPhone. The going rate is $3 million. They might use that on their enemies, whether it's Qatar or Iran. But for the most part, they're using it to spy on their own people, to spy on their Twitter critics. Here in the United States, we see cyber as a necessary way to prepare the battlefield if we ever do need to turn off communication channels or power in Iran or Russia. We'll do that. And then there's this other category of countries like Finland that I learned is actually in the cyber weapons market. Now, you might not think of Finland necessarily as a very bellicose nation, but they do share a border with one of the nation's savviest predators, Russia. So they see their own reason for trying to acquire these tools in the event of a rainy day. So what I was saying just before the break was that really these days that no country, with maybe the exception of Antarctica, is not in this market, is not trying to acquire its own set of offensive cyber hacking tools.
So imagine Joe and Jane Dokes are living in Chicago, happily conducting their lives, and some country decides that they're going to take on the United States, or we decide we're going to take on some country and start a conflict, and that conflict rapidly escalates. We can all imagine if it was a nuclear conflict, we might see atomic bombs on the horizon, or we might just suddenly be vaporized. We can all imagine if there was an invasion, Pearl Harbor, we remember that, at least institutionally. What would this look like? What would it look like to the average citizen of any part of America, in this case, Chicago, for example?
Yeah, well, I think it would look, let me just back up and say, we fear the attack that would take out the power. We fear the attack that could cause a leak at a nuclear plant. We fear sort of a cyber-induced Fukushima event. But what that situation would look like is not so different from what we saw in Texas the other month, when the power went out and people's drinking water became contaminated. It was just interesting to see that we were all paying attention to the situation there. And of course, it was from an underinvestment in winterizing. But that is a situation we fear when we fear a cyber-induced kinetic attack on our critical infrastructure. Those things are entirely possible. There are adversaries in our systems. We are in their systems. Again, we're just waiting for that geopolitical hot point for someone to pull the trigger. But I actually think that no country actually wants to turn off the lights in another nation state, especially in the case of Russia and the United States, because the adversary could just turn around and do it right back to us. Essentially, it's digitally mutually assured destruction. So what I fear is a different scenario, and it's a multi-pronged coordinated attack that involves things we are already seeing here in the United States. So the attack I fear actually looks a lot like the one that was headed off a few weeks ago in Oldsmar, Florida, where hackers, we don't know who they are, broke into a water treatment facility and upped the level of LYE in the water from 100 parts per million to 11,000 parts per million just ahead of the Super Bowl outside Tampa. And what if they hadn't been caught? What if that hadn't been stopped and hackers pulled off a simultaneous ransomware attack on a hospital so that that hospital could not accept new patients? You know, I really fear, and both those things have happened. Earlier in the pandemic, Israel reported that Iran had tried to break into two of its water treatment facilities, potentially to cut water flow or to contaminate the water. So all of these things are possible, and the event I fear the most is a coordinated attack that would involve, you know, 2 or 3 of the things we've already seen at once. And maybe a country uses cyber criminals to pull it off to maintain that degree of plausible deniability. And it would be a while before we determine who exactly was behind it and how do you respond when you don't have that level of attribution. So this is a messy space, and you know, you can do a lot of damage with cyber, and we don't really have good deterrent strategies.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
The book is This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends, The Cyber Weapons Arms Race by Nicole Perlroth. Nicole, thanks so much for dropping by today and talking with us.
For the Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading Locked Down, Locked Out, Why Prison Doesn't Work and How We Can Do Better by Maya Chenwar, who is, or was, I believe she still is, the publisher, or the editor, rather, over at truthout.org. This is from the introduction, the very beginning of the book. She uses a word I can't say on the air. I'll replace it with the word damn. Damn, 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 damn. I'm crying with my mother over the phone. It's late evening, December 25th, 2012, and Kayla, my only sister and best friend, has been arrested for the 7th time in the past 6 years. She's in jail again, and this time we're sort of hoping she'll stay there. If she asks, I tell Mom, I'm not bailing her out. Well, you know, we're not, Mom says, her voice low and far away, a weary echo of words uttered in months and years past. If she's in there, at least she'll be safe. Jail, we agree, may be the only place that can save Kayla's life, staving off her burning dependency on heroin. Neither of us acknowledges that regardless of whether Kayla stays clean while incarcerated, sooner or later she'll be getting out. Do we know what she's in for, I asked Mom. Does it matter? I think of Kayla cuffed and listless, being dragged through the doors of the Cook County Jail, catching the eyes of women she's known before in court, on the street, in juvenile detention, in jail, in prison. I wonder whether a part of her is relieved to be back. Later, when I pick up the phone and hear a robotic voice announce, you have a collect call from the Cook County Jail, press 5 to take the call, I press the hang-up button and get into bed. My attitude toward Kayla's incarceration was born out of desperation. She'd overdosed 3 times within 2 months, passing out on the street, awakening in abandoned buildings or crowded hospitals, her pulse barely ticking. Yet my wish chafed against not only my love for her, but also my politics, my ideals, my sense of justice and truth. After all, I run a social justice-based news organization and have denounced the colossus that is the prison industrial complex for as long as I can remember. For nearly a decade, I've corresponded with a number of people in prison as both interviewees and pen pals, and I've learned much from them about the violence and hopelessness of our system. My understandings of the power structures that create prisons have been guided by the work of people like activist and scholar Angela Davis, a staunch prison abolitionist. How could I reconcile my wholehearted opposition to the prison industrial complex with a desire to see my own sister locked up? When I look back on that time, I can only comprehend it by acknowledging the insidious, persistent role that prison occupied in my mind. It was closely connected to the role it occupies in larger society. Incarceration serves as the default answer to many of the worst social problems plaguing this country. Not because it solves them, but because it buries them. By isolating and disappearing millions of Americans, more than 2.3 million right now, making us the most incarcerated country on the planet, prison conveniently disappears deeply rooted issues that society, or rather those with power in society, would rather not attend to. Prison, writes Angela Davis, performs a feat of magic. As massive numbers of homeless, hungry, unemployed, drug-addicted, illiterate, and mentally ill people vanish behind its walls, the social problems of extreme poverty, homelessness, hunger, unemployment, drug addiction, illiteracy, and mental illness become more ignorable, too. But, as Davis notes, prisons do not disappear problems, they disappear human beings. And the caging and erasure of those human beings, mostly people of color and poor people, perpetuates a cycle in which large groups of people are cut off from mainstream society and denied the freedoms, opportunities, civil dignity, and basic needs that allow them a good life. In many jails and prisons, incarcerated people are tossed into a dank, dungeon-like solitary confinement cell when they are determined to have misbehaved. It's dubbed the hole. Isolated and dark, it shuts out almost all communication with fellow prisoners in the outside. Guards control the terms of confinement and the channels, if any, by which words can travel in and out. The hole presents a stark symbol of the institution of prison in its entirety, which functions on the tenets of disappearance, isolationism, and disposability. The solution to our social problems, the mechanism that's supposed to keep things together, amounts to destruction. The disposal of vast numbers of human beings, the breaking down of families, and the shattering of communities. Prison is tearing society apart. This country's most marginalized communities bear the overwhelming brunt of that devastation, but ultimately we are all caught up in the destruction as the politics of isolation ruptures the human bonds that could otherwise hold together a safer, healthier, and more just society. The behemoth that encompasses the prison is called by many names. Most meaningful ones, I think, are those that convey the pervasiveness of its power, the way it infects the world outside as well as the people within. Scholar and activist Beth Ritchie uses the term prison nation, describing it as, quote, a broad notion of using the arm of the law to control people, especially people who are disadvantaged and come from disadvantaged communities, end quote. That control can take the form of prisons, jails, surveillance, policing, detention, probation, harsh restrictions on child guardianship, the militarization of schools, and other strategies of isolation and disposal, particularly deployed against poor communities of color, especially black communities. Others have used prison nation simply to demonstrate the system's vastness, how it infiltrates our culture and fuels our national politics, often in invisible ways. Prison industrial complex, PIC, is another key term. Rachel Herzing of the prison abolitionist group Critical Resistance defines it, and then she goes on through this. It's an extraordinary book, Locked Down, Locked Out by Maya Shin.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So back in the day, and I mean back in the 1780s, literally, when the Constitutional Convention was happening in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787, there was this debate about the quality of the vote. Whether people who only landowners should be allowed to vote, stuff like that. And, in order to ensure that well-informed people who really care about voting are the only ones voting. It didn't pass. It was rejected by the framers of the Constitutional Convention, this idea that only landowners should be allowed to vote. Never made it in the Constitution. But a variation on this is now being proposed in the Arizona legislature. And State Representative John Kavanaugh, who's the chair of the committee that's pushing this legislation, says the quality of the vote is important. We have to look at the quality of votes as well. I've got a new video all about this for the supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. 35 minutes past the hour. I'll be picking up your phone calls in just a minute. Pretty much anything you want to talk about today. We've covered an awful lot of territory here, including with Congressman Khanna. I did want to point out that there's this, we're on the verge of a disaster down in Florida. 300, I believe it's families or homes have been evacuated as hundreds of millions of gallons of wastewater from a defunct phosphate mine are threatening the town, which raises the question, why do we allow companies to engage in mining operations that produce enormous amounts of waste and not require them to set aside money during the time that they're making the money off the operation that will be used to clean it up. You've got old coal mines all over West Virginia and Pennsylvania that are just, you know, disasters. Well, and not just those countries or states, but all over the country that are just disasters waiting to happen. You've got fracking operations. You've got drilling operations. We have mining operations literally all over the country. Uranium, particularly out in Indian country, out west. Uranium mining where the tailings are still there. They're still radioactive years later. And what do these companies do? Well, we saw it with the coal companies in West Virginia. They make all the profit, they extract all the cash they can, and then they declare bankruptcy after they've paid their CEOs and their stockholders massive amounts of money. And then they declare bankruptcy and say, okay, West Virginia, you get to pay for it. Or in this case, okay, Florida, you get to pay for it. Now, in the case of Florida, in this particular case, it looks like part of this was also the state of Florida itself. Maybe. I've been trying to dig out the details on this. There was a dredging operation nearby, and a lot of the waste from that dredging operation went into this kind of basically toxic waste dump and made the situation much, much worse. I don't know if it's a private company that was doing the dredging or if it was the state or both or who made that decision. But you know, and that's the stuff that is always missing from the coverage. I read the piece in the New York Times today. I read the piece of the Washington Post today. I read the piece of the Financial Times. None of them are talking about who left the taxpayers with the bag, holding the bag. And how did they get away with it? Why isn't there more conversation about this kind of stuff? I don't get it. Anyhow, let me pick up your phone calls, 202-808-9925, our telephone number. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. First off, Dave, I know you didn't call about this, and I'll let you get to your topic, but I'm curious, as a former security analyst with our government, what are your thoughts on Nicole Perlroth's analysis of how low grade and, for that matter, high grade warfare may play out in the 21st century?
Okay, Tom. Hey, ironically, I was thinking about this. You are doing a great civil service. I don't even, in my opinion, I don't even think you realize it when you're advertising and advocating for VPN, keeping keeping as much anonymity as you can. In my opinion, that is extremely crucial because a very, very big vulnerability was exposed during our military adventures in the Middle East. We can't do positive identification. We can't. So what's that got to do with anything? What's PID? Well, when you want to do martial law or occupy a nation, you have to. That is an Achilles heel. If you cannot establish PID, you cannot effectively govern, and that's what martial law is. So if China and Russia ever, are only peer adversaries, if they ever get to the point to where they're occupying the United States of America, I think they're trying to avert the same problem we have. I think they're trying to use the internet to establish positive ID. That's just my opinion. So in my opinion, you should try to minimize that, your ID on the internet. But anyway. Okay.
So you called about Reaganism.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Hey, Reaganism. I had this idea about, Biden. They're talking about the end of Reaganism. The reason why I think Reaganism should end, because, like you say, it is essentially cancellation of government. The Republicans are trying to cancel something that cannot be canceled. All right, they just want to be entertainers. Real governance, they want to be done by CEOs of these capitalist companies, which I don't really trust their motivations. Okay, and I'm thinking Biden has a real opportunity here to to reinstate good government and maybe end Reaganism. The meteorite or the planetesimal VP 2012 VP 113, which is named after Joe Biden. It's a very distant trans-Neptunian object. I don't know if you remember, but they discovered it's got like a 4,000-year rotation about the sun. It got me thinking. Look, the Carmain line is treaty stipulation. All right, you cannot weaponize space above the Carmain line. Okay. Well, we are. It's Donald Trump pioneer, planted his flag there. Okay, and he said, so we're going to weaponize above the Crimean line. All right, there's just no way around it. In space, the expense is going to be done in space, a major expenditure of capital. So I'm thinking, why not just commercialize it? Why not just, let's just pioneer space? I mean, I think the government...
It's already largely happened, hasn't it? I mean, you're listening to me, Dave, on Sirius XM right now. Sirius XM is broadcasting to you via satellite. They're getting my signal via a completely different satellite. My signal goes to Denver, where it goes up on the Westwood One satellite. Then it goes down to New York to Sirius XM. Then they bounce it back to Denver, where they put it up on the Sirius XM satellite. And then it comes to you, which is just amazing when you think about it. That's all commercial activity.
Yes, but let me explain. All right, North
Dave?
Korea. Yeah, I'm here. I just wanted to respond real quick, okay? Can you hear me? Yeah. North Korea and Iran have
yes, sir.
Missile programs, okay? And there is really no reason why that technology couldn't be used to do spacefaring vehicles, all right? And they could all be brought in, not necessarily as allies, but, some sort of level of partnership. And as far as, as far as like actually going to space.
Oh, you're talking beyond Earth orbit. Is that what that line is? I didn't recognize that word. Are you talking about going beyond where you go for Earth orbit?
Yes. Well, the Crimean line is treaty. It's stipulated in treaty. You cannot weaponize above or beyond the Crimean line, which is yes, it is. It would be extended orbit or past the moon. I mean, Donald Trump, like I said, is you've done stories on it. They're going to do the moon base. Now, I was a little bit disappointed because I thought, President Obama wanted to do the asteroid rendezvous. I thought that was a better use of money. But Donald Trump's going back to the moon base thing, okay? And that's going to happen. It's going to happen, And I don't understand why we can't really, in some sort of commercial unified endeavor, bring in some of our adversaries. I mean, I know it may sound crazy, but think about it. I mean, that's my question.
Well, I get it. I think maybe Elon Musk is all over this right now. Anyway, Dave, I need to move along. We've been talking quite a while here. Thank you so much for the call. It's your thoughts are always fascinating. Jim in Tower, Minnesota. Hey, Jim, what's up?
Well, I was calling about the voter suppression in Georgia and thinking that if a person were to go out to their mail and find out their mail-in ballot in the mail, and they started taking boxes out of the neighboring boxes out on the highway, isn't that a felony? And it's 2 felonies, isn't it? Taking mail and then plus taking a person's vote.
Yeah,
and the governor of Georgia is stopping thousands from voting. I would think that's
and this is something what Georgia is doing, by the way, was illegal prior to 2013. It was when John Roberts and the Supreme Court decided that there was no more racism in America because we had elected a black president. Therefore, the southern states could go back to rigging their elections in ways that makes it really hard for black people to vote. In particular, as well as brown people and other minorities and poor people, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I mean, that would have been illegal. And if we can pass H.R. 1, it'll be illegal again. Say that again?
Yeah, if all these right-wing judges wouldn't be in so much trouble from the voting and stuff.
Yeah, well, we do have a small problem with that right now. But I think that this bigger issue of the right to vote needs to be clearly defined. Jim, thank you. It's an important point. But do we have a right to vote? I mean, the phrase right to vote appears multiple times in the Constitution. It appears most prominently in the motor voter law from the late 1990s that says all Americans have a right to vote. But the Supreme Court has never said that.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Could that have something to do with the Supreme Court having been dominated by Republican appointees ever since the 1950s? I think so. And welcome back. Joe in Loxahatchee, Florida. Hey, Joe, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Oh, thank you for taking my call. When the story on that storage unit that dam that for the water is breaking up, they knew about this 10 years ago that it was a problem and it needed to be fixed back then, and they all ignored it.
Was it? Do you know where this problem came from, other than that it was waste from a phosphate mine?
No, but they were saying that they were dredging alongside of it and threw some more stuff in there along with the phosphate. Mm-hmm. But they knew that the dam was damaged 10 years ago, and they did nothing.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Is there anything, I mean, you're a resident of Florida, is there anything Florida residents can do about this?
I doubt it, not with a two-thirds majority of Republicans in both houses.
And wow, and that's where you're at. So it's just, they're just going to get away with it. That's mind-boggling. Joe, thank you very much for the call. Tom in Panama City, Florida. Hey, a big day for Florida. Hey, Tom, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. I don't know if you touched on this subject earlier about the $1,400 check that we're supposed to be getting. I heard, I don't know if it's true or not, and I can't remember where I heard it, but I heard that something about the Republicans kind of put not so much of a stop, but a slowdown on
That's right. Yeah, what happened was Trump had appointed a guy who believes that Social Security should be privatized and done away with as the head of the Social Security Administration. That guy is still there. Biden has not yet replaced him, which I consider to be a huge mistake, but that's a whole nother subject. So that guy, when the $1,400 stimulus or $1,200 stimulus, or plus the previous what was it, $400 was passed. When these stimulus checks were passed, that guy was responsible for getting the information about who should be receiving the checks over to the Treasury Department, which writes the checks. And he didn't do it until last week, when a member of Congress harassed him into it. And it's been like, a month and a half since the bill was passed. And apparently the reason he didn't do it is because he's trying to sabotage Joe Biden, because for the last month and a half, you've had all over Fox News and all the other right-wing TV cable networks and all over right-wing hate radio, all these people going, well, I haven't got my check. Have you gotten your check? Oh, nobody's gotten their check yet. Well, why haven't we? Oh, the Biden administration, they're incompetent. This is what happens when you put Democrats in charge. That's what they're doing, Tom. Makes sense?
Yeah, here's a good, yeah, it certainly does. Here's a good one. I actually live up in the Panhandle, not too far from Alabama. We call it Lower Alabama because of the people here are morons. I asked a guy one time who nobody wears a mask up here, no 6 foot, nothing. I said, have you gotten your stimulus check yet? He said, hell no, because Biden gave it all to the Mexicans. this is their mentality.
Amazing. Tom, thank you for the call. That is truly incredible. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. And if you want to weigh in on any of the issues of the day, there are open lines right now at 202-808-9925. Otherwise, I will be back with some of my thoughts on the issues of the day right after this. Stay tuned. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And you recall back, I'm trying to remember how many years ago it was. It seems like it was 4 or 5 years ago. Maybe early in the Trump administration, maybe the tail end of the Obama administration, the New York Times came out with this 1619 project or analysis, which turned into a thing, and now it's turned into books and articles and all kinds of things. That basically revealed how American history has been whitewashed and pun intended. All right, how the role and the brutality and the awful reality of human beings owning other human beings and having absolute power over them has been expunged by and large from our history. Is not taught in schools. It's not taught, just broadly. It's not part of our media. Every now and then maybe you'll get a movie like Django, but by and large it hasn't been there. And instead, we've been teaching the history of dead white guys, whether they're dead white guys, American dead white guys or dead European white guys, Napoleon or Shakespeare or whatever. And so that's what's been our history. And so there's been an effort now in the last half a decade or so to say, let's start teaching the actual history of the United States. Yes, it might make white people feel uncomfortable, or yes, it may make people who have ancestors who were slaveholders feel uncomfortable, or yes, it may make us view those people who run around with Confederate flags, or or those towns that have Confederate hero statues out in front feel a little uncomfortable, but it's the right thing to do. And you can't move forward if you don't know where you came from. You can't build a future without understanding your past. So, I think this has been broadly accepted across the United States. And in fact, the 1619 Project is starting to be taught in our schools. Thus, South Carolina's legislature just put forward a bill, Senate Bill 534. It's called the Restore America's Foundation Act, that would require at least 30 hours of instruction in United States foundational history. Now, where do you find this? In the 1776 report produced by the Trump administration about how wonderful the founders were. Any mention of slaves in there, slavery? No, not so much. Well, maybe they were happy, right? Come on. It's, this is where we're going. Anyhow, let's pick up some of your phone calls here. Carol in Seattle. Hey, Carol, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. It's been about a year since I've seen you in Seattle Town Hall. Hello.
Oh, hopefully, maybe next year. I don't know. But hopefully
yeah,
soon.
I know. One of these years. So I've been thinking about wage theft, and if we were to correct that with our Social Security, like, say, females retiring, and adjust it by, let's say, 30%, or we could talk about any socioeconomic group that has been marginalized or wage thefted, whatever the word is. Yeah, how, that might be part of something that we can look at. It's not really reparations, but it's an adjustment,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
I get it. I think your point is well taken, and I think it's, frankly, bizarre. Bizarre is not the right word. I get it. When they first created Social Security back in 1935, the idea was that, breadwinners were principally men at that time, and breadwinners would put money into the Social Security fund, and they would get money out of the Social Security fund that would allow them to maintain a slightly reduced version of the lifestyle that they had when they retire. And so we indexed the income that people get from Social Security to the kind of income that they had throughout their lives. But right now my Social Security is about 5 times larger than my wife's, which is wrong, I think. And secondly, it is several times larger than my mother-in-law, who's 90 years old. Worked most of her life, but just never worked at really high-paying jobs. Whereas Louise and I, usually the income was in my name, but Louise and I had built up and sold off a bunch of businesses in the 50 years we've been married, and on numerous occasions we had a lot of years where we had no income, but we also had a handful of years where we had just really, really high income, and therefore my Social Security pops. That's wrong. Everybody who's retired should be able to have a decent standard of living, regardless of how much they made as they were working, and women should not be getting less than men as a vestige of the fact that women were paid less than men, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. So I am completely with you. And I think it's an important issue. Carol, thank you for that, and thanks for bringing it up. Sue in Beaver Dam, Wisconsin. Hey, Sue, what's on your mind today?
Oh, Oh, hi, Tom. Nice talking with you. Actually, I'm calling just as a shout-out to all Wisconsinites to remember to vote tomorrow. We have a very important spring election with a position for state superintendent of schools, and as a Democrat, I'm endorsing Jill Underly, and we also have a couple special elections coming up for an assembly district and also for a state district. So it's really important that Wisconsinites get out and vote tomorrow to our chance to express our vote and our power.
Has there been a good vote by mail
So,
campaign, Sue, put together?
yeah, we're past vote by mail right now. Today I'm phone banking just to make sure they have filled out their absentee ballots, and if not, to fill them out and try to drop them off at the poll tomorrow or to get to the polls.
Right.
We have a lot of polls where there aren't a lot of people, and it might be a 5 or 10 minute wait. So I'm not in Madison or Milwaukee or those bigger districts. I live in Beaver Dam, which is small. But just get out and vote, Wisconsinites. You need to use your voice. That's all we have left.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you very much. And as Sue said, don't forget, democracy starts with you. Tag you're it. Get out there, get active. And have a great afternoon. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place, with more great program. And but be good to yourself and the people around you. Eh? It's a tough time, but we're coming toward the end of this thing. I really think we are, and I'm very optimistic. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. X-Chair, changing the world one seat at a time. More information at xchairtom.com. Bloomsy Box, simply better blooms. More info available at bloomsybox.com, code TOM. And Boll & Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bollandbranch.com, code TOM.